Chapter 24:31. Ji Yunhuang clenched his fists and said in a low voice, "He has already fallen down. You can't save him. Calm down, let's discuss this." He knew that his words were too cruel, but at this time, he had to let her see the truth. He was afraid that she would do something stupid, so he held her arm tightly. Tian Xueqing pushed him away. Her actions were too violent, and Ji Yunhuang staggered from her push. He barely managed to stand up straight. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing was flustered and lost her usual calmness. She spoke without thinking, "You want me to give up on my master? How can you be so ungrateful? My master fell down because he wanted to pick herbs for you. You don't want to save him, and you want to stop me from saving him. It's all your fault. If you didn't cause so much trouble, how could my master fall down the cliff? If my master dies, will you be happy? Let me tell you, you're dreaming. Even if my master dies, I will not marry you. I hate you the most." She couldn't continue speaking. She suddenly turned around and ran towards the cliff. She wanted to see if there was a way to go down. Before Tian Xueqing reached the edge of the cliff, her vision blurred and she bumped into someone's embrace. That person staggered from the impact, but he still firmly held on to her. She suddenly raised her head. "You." She choked on the word. Ji Yunhuang's eyes were pitch black, without any light. They were as dark and cold as a bottomless abyss. He looked at her condescendingly, his expression dark and gloomy. The shadow cast by him enveloped her whole body. This was the first time Tian Xueqing felt such a strong aura from Ji Yunhuang. It was cold and unfeeling. "I have never wished for your master to die. Never. You wait here, I will go and save him." He had put in so much effort, but all he got in return was an ungrateful word. He had never walked into her heart. He, Ji Yunhuang, was simply a joke. Their relationship in this lifetime was simply a joke. She only had her master in her heart, then he would fulfill their wish. After he finished speaking, he flew down. Tian Xueqing only saw a white figure floating down. She hurriedly ran to the edge of the cliff, but she only had time to see his fluttering clothes that almost merged with the white clouds. He didn't look like he was flying down, but more like he was falling. Tian Xueqing's heart almost sank. She clenched her fists, her fingertips digging into her flesh. She suddenly remembered that Ji Yunhuang still had the ice soul poison wreaking havoc in his body. He basically couldn't use his psychokinesis. Then he rushed over in a hurry and saved her. She was afraid that he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Now, he was forced to jump off the cliff. Just now, his face was actually very frighteningly pale. Would anything happen to him if he jumped down like this? Her heart felt like it was being gripped by something, and her body began to tremble slightly. She tilted her head to listen to the sounds below, and her heart hung in the air. After a while, Ji Yunhuang's voice resounded from below, carrying a distant echo. Although his voice wasn't loud, it was clearly transmitted into Tian Xueqing's ears. "Throw down a rope that is long enough. About 200 feet. He was still alive. He spoke. She knew that he had an immortal body. He was someone who could fly, so a small cliff would not be a problem for him. Tian Xueqing's heart finally relaxed a little. "My master. How is he?" She couldn't help but ask as she searched for a rope in her backpack. Chapter 24:32. There was a long silence below. The silence made Tian Xueqing's heart jump. What? My master. My master, is he? She did not dare to ask the rest of her question. He's still alive. Ji Yunhuang's reply finally came from below. Thank the heavens. Master is still alive. Tian Shuiqing heaved a sigh of relief. She finally found a long rope, but it was obviously not long enough. She looked around and found a few sturdy vines, which she tied tightly to the rope. Then, she threw the rope down. Is this okay? She asked the people below her. She did not know why, but she always wanted to talk to him, wanted to hear him speak. Tian Shuiqing felt the rope in her hand sink slightly. Ji Yunhuang's voice came again. It's okay, tie the rope to the thick tree. This time, his voice was much softer, even a little hoarse, as if he was forcing himself to speak. Tian Shuiqing's heart suddenly twisted, as if someone was tightly gripping her heart. She felt unspeakable guilt and sadness. She felt that the words she said when she lost control of her emotions were extremely hurtful. Now that she thought about it, she wanted to slap herself. When he comes up later, she must apologize to him properly, she must expel the poison and treat his injuries, and see if he has any external injuries. Tian Shuiqing anxiously looked at the edge of the cliff, then nervously looked at the rope. It was obvious that someone was pulling the rope up. The rope was constantly tightening, and the huge tree creaked from the rope. Tian Shuiqing looked at the rope that was as taut as a stick, afraid that it would not be strong enough and snap. Her heart tightened again and again. She could not help but reach out and grab the rope, using all her strength to pull it back. The rope tightened, and Tian Shuiqing's nerves were like the rope, tensed up into a straight line. Ji Yunhuang held the rope with one hand and carried GMO with the other, half supporting him as he moved up. The rope was wrapped around Ji-mo's body. His head was full of cold sweat, and his vision was blurry. His vision was turning black, and his body was getting colder and colder. It was as if countless ice needles were rampaging through his body, causing him unbearable pain. Not only was the pain painful, but the most terrible thing was that his hands and feet were weak. Originally, he carried a person up the cliff as if he was walking on flat ground, but now, he felt as if he was carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. He knew that he was nearing his limit. Probably because the rope and the edge of the cliff were worn out too much, a strand of the thick rope could no longer bear the burden and suddenly broke. The rope trembled. His and Ji-mo's bodies also sank down slightly. Tian Shuiqing's heart almost jumped out of her chest. The broken rope was on the edge of the cliff, so she couldn't reinforce it or connect it. She took a deep breath. Are you guys all right? Ji Yunhuang raised his head and looked at the top of the cliff. His heart almost sank to the bottom of the lake. There was still a distance of several hundred feet between them. However, the rope could no longer support the weight of two people. Thinking of Tian Shuiqing's frantic look, his heart twitched. He smiled bitterly. She treasured GMO so much. If GMO died, she would be very sad, right? He had never wanted to upset her. Can the two of you say something? Tian Shuiqing's voice sounded again, and it sounded like she was about to cry. Ji Yunhuang lowered his eyes and indifferently replied, Don't worry, your master is very good. Then, without saying anything else, he carried GMO and climbed up. Chapter 24:33. Tian Shuiqing was so nervous that she almost couldn't breathe. When she heard Ji Yunhuang's voice, she felt slightly relieved but also distressed. He only said that master was very good. What about him? How was he? Tian Shuiqing wanted to ask, but she was afraid that she would distract him. She could only swallow the words that were about to come out. She was so nervous that her hands and feet were cold, and her face was pale. Snap! Another strand of the rope broke, but Ji Yunhuang didn't even look at it. He mobilized all of the remaining psychokinesis in his body, took a deep breath, and flew upwards with GMO in tow. He would risk his life to protect the safety of his beloved. There were only 2 strands left of the 4 strands of rope. These 2 strands were constantly being pulled apart, making a slight snapping sound. At this time, they were still a few feet away from the top of the cliff. Tian Shuiqing could see the 2 people hanging on the cliff. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. They were coming up. They were coming up. The unforeseen event happened at this moment. The rope broke, and the 2 people who were less than 2 feet away from the top of the cliff fell down. Tian Shuiqing cried out in alarm, "No!" Ji Yunhuang was quick-witted. He bit the tip of his tongue and gathered all the psychokinesis in his body into his palm. He slapped GMO, and GMO's body flew up. He fell powerlessly into the bottomless abyss. Tian Shuiqing's head buzzed. Her face instantly turned pale. Ji Yunhuang. She reached out to grab Ji Yunhuang in vain, but she only grabbed air. Ji Yunhuang's body was already exhausted beyond its limit. The ice soul poison could no longer be suppressed, and it ran rampant in his body. He couldn't even move a finger now, so he didn't have the strength to fly up. Looking at the cliff that was getting farther and farther away, he was unwilling. He was just a little bit away from the gate of life, just like his relationship with Tian Shuiqing, it was always a little bit away. Perhaps this was his fate. They always missed each other. He smiled bitterly and closed his eyes. He, Ji Yunhuang, was never the type to sacrifice himself for others. He didn't expect that there would be a day when he would sacrifice himself to save his love rival. Hearing Tian Shuiqing's heart-wrenching screams, he opened his eyes again. Separated by a thin layer of clouds, Tian Shuiqing's face had already become blurry. He couldn't see her expression clearly, but he could imagine that she was extremely heartbroken. What a wonderful cycle of fate. Last time, in order to save Shui Mo, she was buried in the snow mountain. This time, in order to save GMO, he fell off the cliff and died. They had all sacrificed their lives for others and let down the people they loved the most. Ji Yunhuang looked up at the layers of white clouds that were gradually thickening. He sighed as he said his last words, "Shuiqing, take care." Tian Shuiqing's head buzzed and her entire body stiffened. Tears had already crawled all over her face, and her heart felt as though it had sunk into a deep valley filled with sharp knives. It was so painful that she felt as though she was about to vomit. That intense pain caused her entire body to spasm. She suddenly felt an immense sense of fear, as though she was about to lose the most important thing to her. She desperately tried to grab the air with her hands, but there was only air that she could not grasp. Yunhuang, her cry was heart-wrenching, sharp and mournful, but she couldn't get any response from him. With teary eyes, she looked on helplessly as Ji Yunhuang fell through the layers of clouds and disappeared. That "take care" was still echoing in the valley, as though it was his final farewell. It was also his endless instructions to her. Chapter 24-34. Take care. How could she take care of herself? How could she take care of herself when she saw him fall into the abyss? Her heart ached so much that it felt like it was going to split open. How could she take care of herself? She had never thought that he would die. She had never thought that he would have a moment of helplessness, but just now, he had fallen so helplessly. She could not do anything about it. His face was so pale, and his white robe was covered in patches of red and white. It was obvious that he was severely injured. How could he survive if he fell like this? Her head buzzed, and she was about to jump off the cliff. She had forced him to his death, so she did not want to live anymore. "Master!" Wang Kai grabbed her trousers and shouted, "Master, he is an immortal. He won't die from falling off the cliff. Don't do anything stupid. He won't die. Maybe he will still be alive." This faint hope allowed Tian Shuiqing to regain some of her senses. She was really scared now. Her hands and feet were cold, and she felt as if something was going to break out of her heart. Countless memories were spinning in her mind, and every one of them had his face. He came with his sword and cut the netherworld snake in half. He hugged her in his arms and comforted her softly. Shuiqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. When she found out that her master was poisoned by the netherworld poison, she panicked. He patted her back and said gently, Shuiqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. When she fell off the cliff, he pulled her up and patted her. Shuiqing, don't be afraid. I'm here. He had always been protecting her. When she was in danger, he descended like a god and defeated all the difficulties for her. Then, he hugged her and told her not to be afraid because he was here. Unknowingly, he had become her pillar of support. She was not afraid of any difficulties because he would come, but now, he had fallen off the cliff. The clouds covered his face, and she could only hear his sigh. Shuiqing, take care. She had never thought that he would say goodbye to her like this one day. She did want him to leave, but she never wanted him to die. Wang Kai's black eyes were filled with tears. It did not expect Ji Yunhuang to be so loyal. It had never thought that its master would be so sad, as if the sky had collapsed. Tian Shuiqing suddenly stood up and murmured, I want to find him. I want to find him. You are right, he won't die. I won't. He turned around and wanted to run down. Wang Kai hurriedly shouted, Master, wait, Master's poison hasn't been cured yet. Tian Shuiqing stood there in a daze, as though she didn't hear him clearly. She looked at Wang Kai in a daze. Wang Kai repeated again, and Tian Shuiqing's eyes gradually regained focus. Wang Kai saw that its master had regained consciousness, and it could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Tian Shuiqing's heart was in a mess, and her mind was barely working. Only when he saw GMO lying there did he realize that he had to detoxify his master. How could he have forgotten? How could he forget to detoxify his master? Clearly, master was the most important person to him. Could it be that she had already fallen in love with him? A thought surfaced in her mind, and her heart immediately trembled. Impossible. Impossible. She had always liked her master. It was master. But what was with the suffocating feeling in his heart? Why was she so sad for Ji Yunhuang? She had to calm down. Calm down. Save master first, save master first. Tian Shuiqing felt that there was a ball of fire burning in her heart, and it was also as if she had been frozen for 1,000 years. She was indescribably anxious and cold. Chapter 24:35. She took out a detoxification pill with trembling hands and stuffed it into Jimo's mouth. She wanted to apply the needle, but her trembling hands searched for the silver needle on her body. She used to be very efficient, but now she couldn't find the silver needle. Her vision was blurred and she couldn't see clearly. Her mind was also blank. Wang Kai was almost afraid of Tian Shuiqing. It said softly, Master, you should take a rest first. You. She was like this now, so it was easy for her to have problems. Tian Shuiqing finally found a silver needle and wanted to stick it into Jimo's body. Wang Kai suddenly screamed, Stop. Master, that's a poison needle. Tian Shuiqing paused. Her vision was blurred and she couldn't see anything clearly. After focusing for a long time, she could see that the silver needle in her hand had been dipped in a bright green color. She hurriedly threw out the poison needle as if it was a hot potato, almost stabbing Wang Kai Piglet. Wang Kai was shocked and shouted subconsciously, Master, you almost stabbed me. It looked at Tian Shuiqing subconsciously. It was stunned by what it saw. Tian Shuiqing looked at it. Her eyes were misty, like the mist in the early morning. Her tears were falling down one by one. She cried miserably, like a helpless child. Gradually, her skirt was soaked by her tears. This was the first time Wang Kai had seen Tian Shuiqing cry like this. In its impression, its master had always been a calm and collected divine doctor. It had never seen her cry so miserably. This was the first time she had shown the panic of a 14-year-old child. However, Tian Shuiqing only lost her composure for a moment. She knew that the situation was urgent and she didn't have much time. She wiped her face and stood up. Although her voice was still trembling from crying, she had calmed down a lot. She checked GMO's pulse and then took out a red pill and fed it to GMO. She then ordered, "Wang Kai, I've cured Master's poison. You take Master back and put him on a warm jade bed. Give him a clear jade pill every 2 hours." She threw a red medicine bag to Wang Kai and ran down the mountain. Wang Kai shouted behind her, "Master, where are you going?" Tian Shuiqing didn't look back. "I'm going to find him." "Wang Kai, take Master back. Be good." Wang Kai looked at Tian Shuiqing, who was running away and subconsciously wanted to chase after her. However, when he saw GMO, who was still unconscious, he stopped. It suddenly thought of something and took out something from the small pocket in front of its chest. It raised its hoof and threw it up. Boom! A beautiful blue firework in the shape of a lotus flower exploded in the sky. Wang Kai stared at the fireworks and prayed in its heart. Hopefully, the quadruplets would keep their word and arrive in time. Tian Shuiqing ran down the mountain path and utilized her qin gong to the extreme. She was so anxious that she almost fell down several times. Ji Yunhuang, don't die. After running for an unknown amount of time, she was already exhausted, but she still ran without caring about anything else. Her tears had long dried up, leaving 2 tear stains on her delicate face. Her face was almost frozen stiff, and she couldn't feel any warmth. At the end of the run, Tian Shuiqing's legs were almost numb. Every breath she took was as painful as being cut by a knife. She suddenly staggered, her legs went soft, and she fell to her knees. She had hit the ground very hard, and a layer of skin was scraped on her knee. Blood was flowing down. Chapter 24:36. She fell very hard, and a layer of skin was scraped on her knee, causing blood to flow down. She did not even bother to bandage her wound. Instead, she hurriedly sprinkled some medicine on her wound and continued to run down. When she was about to reach the bottom of the valley, she suddenly slipped and her whole body rolled down uncontrollably. At the bottom of the cliff was a deep pool, and the water was so clear that one could see the bottom. Tian Shuiqing rolled down and almost fell into the pool. She ignored the pain all over her body and crawled up. She looked around and her voice was filled with fear. "Ji Yunhuang. Where are you?" She looked around but could not find him. The fear in her heart had reached its peak. Just when she did not know what to do, her gaze suddenly froze. She then opened her eyes wide and looked at the center of the pool. There was a mist above the pool. The milky white mist lingered on the surface of the pool. From afar, it looked like a white sea of clouds. The wisps of mist drifted about, and one could vaguely see something floating above. Tian Shuiqing opened her eyes wide and saw that there seemed to be a white shadow above. Found him. But, her heart was happy at first, but then it suddenly sank, as if there was a weight in her heart. Is he still alive? Tian Shuiqing suddenly did not dare to go forward. Her heart was beating like a drum. No matter what, I have to get him out first. He is such a strong person, so he cannot die. Tian Shuiqing looked at the deep pool in front of her. She took off her outer clothes and jumped in. Cold. The pool water was so cold that she almost jumped up. The cold air was like ice threads that entered her skin and wandered around her body. Her face was pale from the cold. Her long black hair was dyed in the water like a drop of ink on a piece of paper. She stared at the white shadow in front of her. Her heart was beating faster and faster, as if it was going to jump out of her chest. Close. Even closer. Ji Yunhuang's white robe was floating in the water. His eyes were slightly closed, and his long eyelashes cast a shadow under his eyelids. His face was pale, and his lips were thin. The surrounding fog floated around him like clouds, lingering around his body in wisps. This scene was extremely beautiful. He quietly floated there, as if he was sleeping. Tian Xueqing finally swam to his side. She pursed her lips tightly and nudged him. Her voice was filled with hope as she gently called out, Ji Yunhuang. With this push, her heart suddenly sank. It was too cold. It was not the body temperature that a normal person should have. His body was like ice, emitting a chill. The pain hit her like an avalanche, almost suffocating her. Tian Xueqing's hands trembled violently. Her eyes turned red, but she held it back. He couldn't just let him float on the water. She couldn't just leave him here. Even if it meant, she had to bring him back. Tian Xueqing hugged his waist and swam with him to the edge of the water. His coolness with a slight medicinal fragrance lingered around her body. It was so familiar that she wanted to cry. Her eyes turned red and her vision blurred. Hugging him did not make her feel at ease at all. Instead, she was filled with endless panic and fear. Could he be dead? Why was his body so cold? She hugged him, but she couldn't feel any signs of life from him. He originally had the ice soul poison in his body. Previously, he was just barely suppressing it. He should have been lying on the bed and recuperating, but he ran over to save them, and now he fell into the icy pool. The more Tian Xueqing thought about it, the more afraid she became. Her heart felt like it was being pierced by a row of needles. Chapter 24:37. When she was about to reach the shore, Tian Xueqing suddenly felt her calf twitching. Her heart sank. She tried her best to straighten her feet and endure the numbness. She swam forward with all her might and finally reached the shore before the second wave of numbness came. When she reached the shore, the cold wind blew, causing her to shiver. She was so cold that her whole body was trembling. She took off Ji Yunhuang's drenched clothes, revealing his chest that was as white as jade. Then, she draped her coat over his body. She trembled as she checked his pulse. She felt as if her heart had been hit by a sledgehammer. Her limbs and bones were in pain. The constant heartache made her feel as if she was going to vomit her heart out. There was no pulse. There was no pulse. Tian Xueqing's face turned pale and her eyes lost focus. He was dead. He was so powerful, yet he was dead. Impossible. She did not believe it. Tian Xueqing did not give up and continued to check his pulse. She exposed his chest and stared at it. There was a thin layer of frost on his face. His entire body was like an ice sculpture. There was no breath, no heartbeat, no emotional fluctuation. He was just an ice sculpture lying there quietly. There was no pulse. There was no movement. He was dead. He was dead. What should she do? What should she do? As if all the strength in her body had been sucked away, Tian Xueqing sat there powerlessly with tears falling like rain. Her tears dripped onto his ice-cold hands, emitting wisps of white smoke. At this moment, she suddenly felt a weak pulse. Tian Xueqing was shocked. She wiped away her tears and carefully checked his pulse. His pulse was very weak and intermittent. If not for Tian Shuiqing's attentiveness, she would not have felt it. He was still alive. But he was lingering around the gates of hell. Tian Shuiqing immediately became nervous. Her hands were trembling. She patted her face and forced herself to calm down. Don't panic, don't panic. Time was running out. He could die at any time. Tian Shuiqing took a deep breath. She first pried open his mouth and fed him a life-extending pill. Then, she took out a silver needle and started to prick his body with difficulty. This life-extending pill was a divine medicine that she had specially developed. It could prolong a person's last breath, but it could only last for 6 hours. She didn't have anything else on her right now. She didn't bring any other medicinal herbs, so she couldn't give it to him. She could only use the silver needles to seal his acupoints to prevent the poison from spreading further. Then, she would bring him back as quickly as possible. Tian Shuiqing was calculating rapidly in her mind, but the needles in her hands were very steady. She accurately inserted them into the corresponding acupoints. Hiss, hiss, a sound rang out not far away. It was the unique sound of snakeskin sliding across the grass. It was getting closer and closer to them. Based on the sound of friction, they could tell that it was a large snake. A silver-white snake slithered forward, its tongue sticking out as it slowly approached. The snake arched its body, clearly a sign that it was about to attack. However, Tian Shuiqing did not even look at him. Even though she was sweating profusely, her movements did not slow down at all. Her movements were as smooth as flowing water. Now was the crucial moment of acupuncture, and she could not afford to be distracted. With a gust of wind, 4 more people appeared out of nowhere. The 4 of them were wearing the same clothes and looked exactly the same. The youngest of the quadruplets saw that Ji Yunhuang was not breathing, and her heart sank. She wanted to rush forward. Moss. One of them reached out his hand to stop her and covered her mouth. He said sternly, Miss Qing is performing acupuncture on Master. Don't disturb her, oh. Chapter 24:38. One of them reached out to stop her and covered her mouth. He sternly transmitted his voice, Miss Qing is performing acupuncture on Master. Don't disturb her. He looked worriedly at Ji Yunhuang, who was covered in silver needles, and Tian Shuiqing, who was sweating profusely. He then looked at the snake that had started to retreat. He raised his arm and made a gesture. The 4 twins understood and immediately split into 4 directions to protect the 2 people in the middle. One of them took care of the silver snake. With the 4 of them guarding them, not even a fly could enter. The time it takes for an incense stick to burn passed. 2 hours passed. Tian Shuiqing was so cold that she almost lost consciousness. Her head was dizzy and every breath she took was scalding hot. She was running a high fever. This fever came very quickly. Not long after, her whole body became weak and her hands started to tremble slightly. She tried her best to keep her eyes open and persevered. After another half an hour, Tian Shuiqing finally pulled out the silver needles. After removing the last silver needle, she wanted to stand up. However, her vision suddenly turned black and she fell down weakly. One of the 4 twins caught her. Tian Shuiqing opened her misty eyes and tried her best to wake up. However, darkness quickly attacked her and nibbled away at her consciousness. Before she lost her consciousness, she grabbed that person's sleeve and reminded him repeatedly, bring him back to the tranquil mountain. Remember, you must carry him flat. Do not move at all. The darkness came like a tide and completely drowned her. Shuiqing, take care. Ji Yunhuang looked at her deeply and took a step back. He fell down the endless cliff. No. Tian Shuiqing suddenly woke up. The darkness scattered like shooting stars. When Tian Shuiqing opened her eyes, she saw Ji Mo's worried face. She was stunned for a moment and her eyes were filled with confusion and helplessness. Master, GMO touched Tian Shuiqing's forehead and sighed in relief. Everything is fine now. Tian Shuiqing grabbed GMO's sleeve. Her eyes were filled with weakness and nervousness. Master, where is he? GMO's eyes moved. I have already refined the antidote. I just gave it to him last night. He has already taken the antidote? Does that mean that he is already awake? Tian Shuiqing's heart was filled with joy, and her eyes couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy. Master, has he woken up? How is his physical condition now? GMO looked at Tian Shuiqing in silence. When she opened her eyes, all her questions revolved around Ji Yunhuang. She didn't ask him how he was doing, nor did she ask herself how she was doing. GMO's silence made Tian Shuiqing, who had just calmed down, worry again. She carefully asked. Master. Could it be that he hasn't woken up yet? Fear was like a tidal wave that slapped at her heart. The look in GMO's eyes was indifferent. He was looking down at her from above. His appearance was somewhat cold. This was the first time Tian Shuiqing had seen GMO like this. She was stunned for a moment before she finally realized that there was something wrong with his mood. Her eyes were filled with doubt as she asked. Master, what's wrong? GMO looked into her eyes. His usually gentle eyes now had a hint of sharpness. Shuiqing, tell Master the truth. Have you already fallen in love with Ji Yunhuang? Tian Shuiqing stood there in a daze for a moment. She loves Ji Yunhuang. That's impossible. She should only feel guilty towards him. He fell down the cliff to save her master, so she felt very guilty. That's it. Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang's feelings towards her should only be transference. Chapter 2439. Furthermore, Ji Yunhuang's feelings for her should only be transference. The one he truly loved was his crown princess who had died young. The reason why he was so good to her now was only because he saw her as a substitute for that person. Tian Shuiqing's heart was filled with bitterness. She had never wanted to be anyone's substitute. GMO did not disturb her when he saw that she was in a daze. He only looked at her quietly, but the expression in his eyes was getting heavier and heavier. She had been thinking for a long time. Her eyes were half bright and half dark. It was obvious that she was struggling. If she did not love him, the answer should have been out of her mouth. Why was she struggling for such a long time? She was already moved, but she did not know it. GMO's heart was getting heavier and heavier. Tian Shuiqing finally came back to her senses. She looked straight into GMO's eyes and firmly shook her head. Master, you think too much. This disciple does not love him. This disciple just feels guilty towards him. GMO looked at Tian Shuiqing with a complicated expression. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he only sighed. Tian Shuiqing looked at him for a while, then subconsciously looked away. She suddenly remembered that her master had not answered her question. Her heart jumped, and she asked again, Master, is he awake? GMO shook his head, and simply spat out 4 words, she's still unconscious. The poison had clearly been cured, so why was he still unconscious? Tian Shuiqing only felt a burning anxiety in her heart. She could no longer lie down and wanted to get out of bed. GMO raised his hand to stop her. Shuiqing, where are you going? You should take care of your body. You have been unconscious for nearly 3 days. Tian Shuiqing felt as if there was a fire burning in her heart. Master, I just want to see him. I just want to see him. She did not know if she was saying this to GMO or herself. GMO's eyes were so dark that it was hard to discern his expression. It is useless even if you go. What does he mean by it is useless even if I go? She felt as if she had suddenly fallen from the sky. At that moment, her heart almost stopped beating. Master, what do you mean? She only realized that her voice was trembling when she spoke. GMO sighed. Forget it, you should go and see him yourself. Tian Shuiqing's heart suddenly sank. Countless terrifying guesses appeared in her mind, but she fiercely slapped them back down. She jumped out of bed, hurriedly put on her shoes, and stumbled out. GMO stood in the same place, looking at her back as she ran away, deep in thought. Heavenly Fragrance Court. With the quadruplets guarding the door, not even a fly could enter. Seeing Tian Shuiqing stumbling over, they respectfully said, Miss Qing. Then, they made way for her. Tian Shuiqing nodded slightly and rushed into the room. With a creak, the door was pushed open, and sunlight poured into the room like a tide. It lit up the room, and it also lit up him. The calming incense in the room burned slowly, hovering in the air, bringing a fragrance and tranquility to the room. A man in white was lying on the bed. He had a handsome face, a pale complexion, and thin lips. On such a beautiful spring day, when one seemed to have stopped in front of him, no longer moving forward, leaving him alone as cold as snow. His entire body exuded a faintly discernible chill. Tian Shuiqing pursed her lips and stepped forward. Her fingertips trembled slightly. They were slightly cold as they touched his skin. The warm and soft touch almost made her cry. Although his body temperature was still somewhat low, it was much better than the coldness of a dead person before. Chapter 2440. She felt for his pulse. It pulsed faintly under her skin. He was still alive. No matter what, he was still alive. Tian Shuiqing suddenly had the urge to hug him and cry. She was scared out of her wits when she saw her master's hesitant look. She thought that he was dead and would never come back. Fortunately, he was still alive. As long as he was still alive, there was hope. But since he was still alive, why did her master look hesitant? Her heart had just calmed down a little, but it immediately rose again. She took a deep breath and calmed her heart down. Then, she began to examine him carefully. Tian Shuiqing checked him from head to toe, and her face became paler. He was breathing, his heart was beating, and he could react instinctively to external stimuli. But, he was unconscious. He did not have any consciousness at all. He was clearly lying peacefully in front of her, but Tian Shuiqing felt that there was a world of distance between them. He was already in a vegetative state. On the 7th day, 2 of the quadruplets were missing. Tian Shuiqing walked in with weak steps. Her face was as pale as a ghost, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was very dizzy, and the world was spinning with every step she took. She had not slept for 6 days and 6 nights. For the past few days, she had been reading all kinds of medical books like a madwoman, looking for a way to cure Ji Yunhuang. She took countless kinds of medicinal herbs and threw them into his mouth as if they were free. She also poured bowl after bowl of medicinal soup into his mouth, then, as if waiting for a verdict, she stayed by his side and stared at him, hoping for a miracle to happen, but it was useless. There was no effect at all. It was not like this had never happened before. In fact, Tian Shuiqing had cured many people who were in a vegetative state, and she had found many ways to cure them, but none of those methods worked on him. Was it because he was a deity? She immediately went to look for ways to cure him. Over the past few days, she had tried all kinds of methods and remedies, but none of them worked, no matter how hard she worked for days and nights without sleep. She could only watch him lose his life bit by bit. His heartbeat became slower and slower, and his pulse became weaker and weaker, his body became colder and colder. He was dying bit by bit, but she could not do anything about it. Tian Shuaching walked to the bedside and looked at the face of the person lying on the bed, which seemed to be carved from cold jade. She was in a trance. His legs went soft, and he fell to the ground, his vision turning black. She held his wrist that was as cold as snow, and the coldness flowed through her pores, penetrating her limbs and bones. His pulse was so weak that it almost stopped a few times. If this continued, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to survive the night. For the first time, she felt powerless. Oh. She had healed everyone in the world, but she could not wake him up. She didn't owe anyone a debt, but he was the only one she regretted. His tears dripped onto her hand, but she did not seem to feel it. She only held on tightly to his hand and said with a trembling voice, "Ji Yunhuang, did you purposely smash my plaque? Do you think I owe you something? I haven't even blamed you for treating me as a substitute, but you're blaming me first. How can you be so unreasonable? You're the one in the wrong. You're the one in the wrong." Tian Shuaching's consciousness was already in a trance. She hadn't slept for several days and nights, so her mind was in a mess. She was almost unconsciously repeating this sentence. Chapter 24:41. She grabbed his wrist and did not let go for even a moment. She was afraid that if she let go, he would leave without a sound. Therefore, no matter how scared she was, no matter how terrified she was, she still held on to his wrist tightly. Only by feeling his pulse could she feel a little more at ease, although his pulse was getting weaker and weaker, just like her heart was getting heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she could no longer feel his pulse. He died. It was as if she had been struck by lightning in the middle of a rainstorm. She jumped up, and with a flustered and frightened body, she reached for his chest in a flurry, but she couldn't feel even the slightest beat. Her mind was blank, and the world seemed to have gone silent. She could not hear anything, and she could not see anything. She could only rely on her doctor's instinct to take out a pill and feed it to him. Then, she quickly and mechanically treated him. After the whole procedure, her mind was blank. She was so flustered that she felt as if the whole world was trembling. She felt his pulse again, but there was still no pulse. She was so flustered that she almost suffocated. She stumbled and ran outside. Her voice was trembling like an autumn leaf in the wind. "Call my master. Quickly call my master." Her voice was uncontrollably high, and it was almost mournful. The twins who were guarding the door looked at each other and assigned the tasks. One was responsible for finding GMO, and the other was responsible for going in to check the situation. Tian Shuaching suddenly tripped on the blanket on the ground and fell heavily on the ground. She was already exhausted, and with this fall, her vision was quickly invaded by darkness, and she fell into a deep coma. She was half conscious and half awake. She was still staring at the bed, hoping that the person would get up and help her up. However, he did not even move a finger. The darkness was like a tide, and it instantly drowned her. Her consciousness went up and down in the tide for an unknown amount of time. Suddenly, there was a bright light in front of her eyes. She had a dream that spanned 100 years. When GMO arrived, Tian Shuaching was still lying on the bed, still unconscious. The four twins placed her and Ji Yunhuang side by side. Unknowingly, the two's hands were intertwined. Tian Shuaching's consciousness seemed to be trapped somewhere. She was in a deep sleep, and no matter how much she was called, she would not wake up. Tears kept falling from the corners of her eyes, wetting the bedding under her body drop by drop. No matter how hard he tried, his disciple wouldn't wake up. Even though GMO was usually calm, at this moment, he was somewhat anxious. She seemed to be possessed by a nightmare. GMO patted his little face. "Shuaching, wake up. Shuaching." More and more tears flowed from Tian Shuaching's eyes, and she gradually began to sob softly. However, she still could not open her eyes. GMO took out a silver needle and was about to insert it when he heard the unconscious Tian Shueching suddenly sob. Yunhuang, GMO's hand paused, and his heart sank. He sighed. She had really fallen in love with him. But Ji Yunhuang, after the dream ended, Tian Shueching slowly opened her eyes. In her watery eyes, the sadness was exceptionally clear, like a ball of thick ink that couldn't be dissolved. Her eyes were empty, confused, and filled with despair that did not belong to her age. When he opened his eyes, he saw Ji Mo's worried face. She was still holding Ji Yunhuang's pulse in her hand, but there was still no movement. The heart-wrenching pain came after 100 years. It was so painful that it penetrated her heart. As if she did not see GMO, she turned her head and faced Ji Yunhuang. She stared at his pale face and cried. She curled herself up into a small ball and locked herself in his embrace. Her hoarse voice trembled intensely as she said, "Yunhuang. Do you blame me? Guess what happened to Shueching? Monthly votes, hurry up and save the sleeping prince." Chapter 2442. She placed her small hand in Ji Yunhuang's palm and squeezed her body into his embrace as if she was afraid of the cold. Her body was shivering from the cold, but she refused to leave. Her voice was small and weak like a whisper in the wind, "You should blame me. I also hate myself. How could I?" Her voice trembled violently and she was in so much pain that she could not speak. After a long time, she finally managed to speak. "How could I forget you? How could I forget you? Forget him, hurt him, and finally forced him to his death. She had loved him so much in the past. It doesn't matter if you resent me or blame me. Can you wake up first? You can only take revenge on me after you wake up, right? If you don't wake up, how can you see how heartbroken I am?" Tian Shueching hugged Ji Yunhuang's waist as if she was hugging a block of ice. Her face was full of tears and her watery black eyes were filled with pain. There was no reply for a long time. She was destined not to hear a reply. "You still hate me. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to bear to see me so sad. What can I do to make you feel better? Can you tell me?" She was in so much pain that she was not clear-headed. She could only rely on her stubbornness to look deeply at Ji Yunhuang, as if she was looking at her only salvation in this life. "Shueching, you. He's already dead." Seeing her in such despair, Ji Mo's heart ached terribly. However, this could not go on. She was not clear-headed at the moment. If he did not wake her up, the consequences would be unimaginable. "No." Tian Shueching's voice was so sharp that it was almost ear-piercing. GMO was also shocked by the strong emotions that suddenly erupted from her body. As if she had realized this, Tian Shueching's voice softened again. "He won't die. Master, he's a deity. Have you forgotten? Shueching, Master, can you not say any more? I beg you. Let me stay with him for a while. Just a while will do." Her voice eventually became weak, like a leaf that had been blown away by a strong wind. She looked at GMO, her eyes filled with pain and pleading. GMO's lips moved and he reached out his hand to pat her. However, he paused. Accompanied by a sigh, he turned around and left. His low voice was like a calm dream. "Shueching, no matter what. You still have Master. You're not alone." The door was pushed open and then closed with a creak. The sound of footsteps faded away, leaving behind a mottled floor. Tian Shueching heavily closed her eyes as tears flowed down her cheeks. Ji Mo's words before he left reverberated in her mind, stirring up huge waves in her heart. "Master, you don't know. You don't know that when he left, he dug a hole in my heart, a hole that pierced through his heart. I have nothing left. Her heart ached to the extreme. Every time she breathed, it hurt intensely. This kind of mental pain was accompanied by a huge emptiness. It made her feel like she was hovering between life and death. Oh. At the same time, she was also confused. She curled her body into a ball like a shrimp, and her consciousness was in so much pain that she was about to faint. She fiercely hugged him, but her voice was soft and gentle, and it contained a deep pain. Ji Yunhuang, I already have nothing left. What else do you want? I'll let you do whatever you want to me. In fact, the most painful ones were never the dead, but the living who were suffering in a life worse than death. It was truly hell. It was never physical torture, but mental desolation. Tian Xueqing closed her eyes and her consciousness returned to silence. Her weak voice was like a whisper in the wind. You've already sent me to hell. In her daze, she seemed to see Ji Yunhuang sit up. Chapter 2443. Suddenly, he slowly walked over from the void. His body was surrounded by a faint halo, and he was still the elegant and handsome High Immortal. She stood there in a daze, not daring to blink her eyes. She was afraid that if she blinked, he would disappear again. The halo was getting closer and closer to her. He stood in front of her and stretched out his hand, as if he wanted to wipe away the tears on her face, but he put it down again. Tian Xueqing held her breath and looked at him in a daze for a moment. She finally reacted and subconsciously wanted to hug him, but she did not expect that she would smash him into pieces. The golden light scattered in all directions and floated in the air like a galaxy. Then, the golden light slowly condensed into a human figure and reappeared in front of her. You! Tian Xueqing's tears fell again. He was in the void, hugging her weakly. His body's cold and delicate fragrance surrounded her. A soft voice sounded in her mind with a hint of helplessness. Xueqing. Tian Xueqing looked at him with teary eyes, and her voice was full of hope. Can you come back? I miss you very much. Ji Yunhuang's body seemed to stiffen, and he did not speak for a long time. Finally, he sighed. Xueqing, I'm sorry. Forget me. The golden light condensed in his hand, and he placed his hand on her long hair and stroked it. His warm breath made her greedy, and his touch made her heart feel peaceful. Her heart became incomparably peaceful, and the pain and despair of the past few days slowly faded away. Some of the unforgettable scenes in her mind slowly faded away. She was shocked, and she struggled to break free. Never. The dream came to an abrupt end, and she suddenly opened her eyes. It was still the same room, and the same bed. He was still lying there without making a sound. Tian Xueqing stared at the person on the bed, and her eyes were a little empty. The night was cold, and the moonlight was like water. Cicadas were chirping non-stop outside the window, and along with the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the reflection of the big round moon, it was a summer day. Outside the window, the hot wind blew, but inside the room, it was a little cold. She subconsciously stretched out her hand and touched Ji Yunhuang's long eyelashes. When his eyelashes touched her palm, it was itchy and trembling, and her heart also trembled. She originally wanted to leave after touching him, but she lingered on. Her little hand brushed past his slightly closed eyes, his high nose bridge, and his thin lips. She closed her eyes and recalled the warmth in her short dream, as well as the faint and helpless apology that came from the void. She held his hand that was hanging by the side of the bed. His hand was cold, and no matter how she held it, she couldn't warm it up. Her heart was also turning cold inch by inch. This hand had once caressed every part of her body, this hand had once mercilessly pushed her away. This hand had once filled her with despair. It was also this hand that had saved her and her master. It was also this hand that had held her hand and told her not to be afraid, this hand had once dragged her to heaven, and it had also once pushed her into hell. Now, this hand was powerless to do anything else. No matter how hard she tried to grab it, it would not give her any reaction. She pressed her face against the hand and closed her eyes slightly. Yun Huang, when I was dragged underground by the ghost rot 100 years ago, I did blame you, but I didn't hate you. You didn't do anything wrong, you just didn't love me. I hated myself for my wishful thinking. So when I died, I swore to the heavens that I would forget you in my next life and never meet you again. Her voice was very calm, empty and calm. Chapter 24:44. No one answered. She looked at the moonlight outside the window, lost in thought as she stared at the silver floating in the air. Her long eyelashes formed a row of shadows under her eyelids. Her face was as pale as snow, like a fragile porcelain doll. The room was very quiet. The cicadas outside the room seemed to have sensed the unusual atmosphere and tactfully stopped chirping. The sounds of the outside world gradually faded away. It was as if she had been placed in a vacuum, isolated from the rest of the world. But now, I hate you very much, she said softly. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, like the wings of a butterfly. She repeated herself, Ji Yunhuang, did you hear that? I hate you very much. In our previous life, you clearly fell in love with me, so why were you so heartless to me? You treated Shumo better than me. You were always cold to me. Whether I cried or was in pain, you didn't care about me. Yunhuang, I loved you so much that I didn't feel like myself anymore. I couldn't extricate myself. If I knew your feelings for me, I wouldn't have begged for death just to forget you. In this life, I really did forget you, but you appeared in front of me again. You used such a tragic method to remind me of the past. You disrupted my two lives, and now you want to make up for it by simply erasing my memories. Tian Xueqing's eyes were big and empty. The moonlight was bright, but it didn't leave a trace of light in her eyes. She slowly spat out two words with determination and ruthlessness, absolutely not. I won't forgive you, and I won't forgive myself either. Her hand gently brushed against his cold face, which was as cold as jade to the touch. She knew that his soul had already left long ago, leaving only an empty shell here, which only made her sad. She looked at his face and suddenly revealed a smile, as if she had finally figured something out. Tian Xueqing lowered her head and planted a kiss on his cold lips. If you don't accompany me, I'll accompany you. Wait for me. No one knew how Tian Xueqing carried Ji Yunhuang out. The wind on the cliff was very strong, causing people to feel cold all over. Her long hair fluttered in the wind as she carried him. Her green dress fluttered in the wind, like a butterfly that was about to flap its wings and fly away. She hugged him strenuously as she looked at the bottomless abyss below her. As she looked at the floating white clouds, a myriad of emotions seemed to flash through her eyes. Yunhuang, do you know why I chose this place? Under the moonlight, his face was as pale as snow, quietly lying in her arms. The wind messed up his hair, his clothes. She faintly smiled and raised her hand to carefully tidy up his clothes. Then, she tidied her hair and leaned down to kiss him on the lips. She whispered, because this is the only way to catch up to you. You won't abandon me again. Hugging him, he jumped down. The wind whistled, blowing like a knife. The force of the fall grew stronger and stronger. The huge sense of weightlessness almost made her heart burst, but she hugged him tightly and closed her eyes, waiting for the last moment to come. Bang! With a loud bang, Tian Xueqing seemed to have bumped into something. Everything in front of her eyes turned black, and darkness flooded her like a tidal wave. At the last moment before she lost consciousness, she hugged Ji Yunhuang tightly in her arms. Since they couldn't be together in life, then they might as well die together. In the sky, on the clouds, a man and a woman were sitting. The man was wearing a loose robe with big sleeves. His hair was as black as ink, and his clothes were as white as the clouds. His appearance was as if it was carved out of ice, making people feel that it was blasphemous to look at him. Chapter 24:45. However, he was holding a red-clothed girl in his arms. The red-clothed girl had an elegant appearance. Her eyes were big and her mouth was small. When she curled her lips slightly, 2 dimples could be seen at the corners of her lips. Her beauty revealed a hint of laziness, but there was also a hint of comfort in her laziness. At this moment, the girl raised her head and looked at him. "Great God, is this the best moment you were talking about?" The man held her with one hand and calmly kept a transparent net in his other hand. He only replied with a single word, "Yes." This man and woman were naturally the ancestor Shinjioli and the devil master Ning Xuemo. In the net, Tian Xueqing and Ji Yunhuang were tightly hugging each other. It was as if they couldn't be separated even if heaven and earth collapsed. Ning Xuemo glanced at the net and saw that Tian Xueqing's eyes were tightly closed. Her 2 small hands were tightly gripping Ji Yunhuang's waist. Her knuckles were white and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her lips. Her small face was buried in Ji Yunhuang's arms as if she had found the person she could rely on for the rest of her life. The 2 of them were hugging each other like a pair of mandarin ducks. Ning Xuemo glanced at the great god beside her. "I feel that you could have taken action when Ji Yunhuang was about to die. Why did you have to drag out such a tragic ending?" Shinjioli finally lifted the 2 people into the clouds. His finger touched Ji Yunhuang's wrist. After a while, he removed his hand and replied casually, "If I didn't force her into a desperate situation, how would she be able to break through the blood curse of her previous life and regain her memories?" He glanced at Tian Xueqing and sighed. "This blood curse can only be broken by herself. Outsiders can't help her at all." Ning Xuemo finally understood why Shinjioli took action so late. She finally felt relieved. She looked at Ji Yunhuang and asked, "Can he still be saved?" "Of course." Shinjioli answered confidently. "It won't be easy for anyone to die in front of me." The thin rays of sunlight danced on the ground, forming spots of light. On the bed in the room, Ji Yunhuang slowly opened his eyes. At first, he seemed to be in a daze, but after a while, his eyes became clear. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look to the side. There was a woman lying next to his arm. This woman was obviously very sleepy. Her eyes were closed and she was in a deep sleep. However, her fingers were tightly gripping his hand, as if she was afraid that he would run away. Xueqing. The sunlight danced on the side of her face, softening her cheeks. She fluttered her eyelashes uncomfortably. Xueqing. Ji Yunhuang raised his hand and shielded her face from the light. His gaze was gentle as he lowered his head and gently kissed her on her trembling eyelashes. Tian Xueqing moaned in her sleep, as if she was sleep-talking. "Yunhuang, don't leave me behind." Her words lit up Ji Yunhuang's eyes. He held her hand tightly as if he was holding the most important treasure in his life. Of course, he wouldn't abandon her. Never again. He had searched for her for 100 years, and now he had finally found her. He checked his body and found that all the injuries had disappeared without a trace. Other than the slight weakness in his body, he was fine. His eyes flickered. Di Zun's technique. He knew very well that he would definitely die at that time. Even he himself was powerless to save the situation. Only Di Zun could pull him back from the gates of hell and help him recover so quickly. He lowered his eyes and looked at the person lying on the bed who didn't seem to be sleeping comfortably. His heart warmed. He raised his hand and moved her onto the bed, nestling her shoulder to shoulder with him. She seemed to finally feel comfortable. Her body automatically snuggled up to him and she hugged his arm as she finally fell asleep. Tian Shueqing and Ji Yunhuang's story has basically come to an end. There will be some sweet interactions between the great god and Shuemo later. On the last day of the month, I will roll around and act cute to beg for monthly votes, monthly votes, monthly votes. Important things have to be said 3 times. There will be no updates in the early hours of the morning, so there is no need for everyone to stay up late. For the sake of everyone's health, the update time will be changed to around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 2446. Her current posture was the same as when she first came to his side 100 years ago. She loved him like a madwoman and was greedy for his warmth. When he was asleep, she would snuggle up to him and sleep contentedly just like now. At that time, although he hated her instinctively, when he woke up and saw her like this, his heart would soften. He would quietly move his arm away from her embrace so as not to wake her up. However, later on, she truly despaired of him. Even when she slept beside him, she would curl up into a ball and never come close to him again, causing him to feel disappointed for no reason. Even when he took her into his arms while she was asleep, her body was stiff and filled with a strong sense of repulsion. The moment he loosened his grip, she would roll far away. She would rather stick her body against the wall than take a step closer to him. Only when he lost her did he realize how much he longed for her to completely trust and rely on that position. For 100 years, he had dreamt of her in this position countless times, but when he woke up, he would always be alone. Now, she was sleeping beside him in this position again. He closed his eyes slightly and quietly stretched out his arm to pull her into his embrace. She was like a kitten snuggling into his embrace. He quietly breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that once he hugged her, he would never let go again. This hug would last until the end of time and they would never be separated. He also knew that they still had a long way to go. He had to supervise her cultivation and solve the problem between her and GMO. There were still many things he had to do. However, as long as she could stay by his side, he could solve all of those problems one by one. 100 years of yearning, 100 years of yearning. Now that he had her in his embrace, how could an ordinary hug be enough to satisfy him? As Ji Yunhuang hugged her, he wanted to kiss her, kiss her, kiss her. He wanted to feel the warmest reality. He looked at her in his embrace. If he remembered correctly, today was her 15th birthday and she could be considered an adult. He wanted to give her an unforgettable birthday present. He flipped over and lightly pressed down on her. His lips covered hers, on a hillside covered in green grass. Shinjioli lazily sat on a large rock with a guqin placed horizontally on his lap. His 10 fingers gently plucked the strings of the guqin, and the sound of the guqin flowed out, weaving a mirror in the air. What appeared in the mirror was Ji Yunhuang's pair. Ning Shuemo rested her chin on her hand and looked at the scene in the mirror with great interest. Seeing Ji Yunhuang wake up in a daze, seeing him put Tian Shueqing on the bed, seeing him pull her into his embrace, she loved watching this kind of couple drama. It gave her a sense of accomplishment. Schwa! The wavy mirror suddenly disappeared, and the description of the pair could no longer be seen. She turned around and saw Shinjioli looking at her with a smile that was not a smile. Are you addicted to this kind of drama? Ning Shuemo was still somewhat unsatisfied. She raised her hand and touched her nose. She coughed and said that it's all right. This kind of drama of a broken mirror being reunited is originally very interesting. She looked at Shinjioli seriously and laughed. She teased him, "You're in such a hurry to remove it because you're afraid that I'll see something that I shouldn't see." Don't worry. Ji Yunhuang has just woken up from a serious illness, and Tian Shueqing is also sleeping from exhaustion. They won't really do anything. At most, they'll kiss and hug each other. This kind of drama doesn't need to be censored. I've seen it before in kindergarten. Before she could finish her words, her body suddenly flew up. When she came back to her senses, she had already landed in Shinjuli's embrace. Chapter 24:47. Although she was not short, she was petite and exquisite in Shinjuli's arms. They fit perfectly. Shinjuli lifted her chin with his fingertips. You've seen it in kindergarten? Have you practiced it before? His voice was deep and gloomy, as if it had the power to hook one's soul. Ning Xuema held his fingertips and subconsciously sensed danger. She hurriedly shook her head. No, absolutely not. This great god was a vinegar jar. She didn't want him to upset her. Shinjuli looked down at her in his arms. She had been on her period for the past few days, and he had not been intimate with her for 4 days. Before he had tasted it, he was a ruthless god. Even if there was a beauty dancing in front of him, he would still be able to sit in his arms. But since he was with her, he could not leave her beauty. He was almost insatiable every night. He would only let her go when her period came. Ning Xuema did not want to provoke him, so she would deliberately stay away from him during these few days. Ning Xuema was lying on his lap. She could not be more familiar with him. Even the subtle changes in his body could not escape her touch. She could clearly feel that his body, which had always been cold, was gradually heating up. When she raised her head, she looked into his extremely dark eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. She wanted to turn around and jump up, but he used one of his arms to stop her. His fingertips touched her red lips. Xuema, it's boring to look at other people. Why don't you do the real version with me? How could this almighty say such ambiguous words in such an open and aboveboard manner? Not only did he say it openly, but he also did it openly. His fingers had already started to pick up her lapel. Ning Xuema quickly held his hand. Although people did not often come to this hillside, it did not mean that no one would come. She did not want to have sex with him here. God, calm down. Once Shinjuli's interest was piqued, he couldn't remain calm. With a wave of his hand, he set up a barrier around himself. Then, with a flip of his body, he pressed Ning Xuema onto a long-haired emerald green blanket. He leaned over and looked at her. His handsome face was right above her. His black hair flowed like water, flowing over her face and neck. It was as if it could flow into her heart. Xuema, you have to pay the price for watching porn. Ning Xuema, she wanted to cry but had no tears. What kind of movie was she watching? He couldn't even be considered a rank. Yet, she had to accompany him in a performance of the restricted level. Sometimes, it was not a good thing to have a husband who could set up enchantments, because once he was in the mood, she could be with him on any occasion. Because even if it was a busy city, as long as he set up a barrier, no one would be able to discover the situation inside the barrier. He could do whatever he wanted to her. His kiss landed, and along with the kiss, his hands, the temperature gradually rose. Accompanied by the sound of each other's breathing, their clothes gradually became messy. Ning Xuema raised her hands and hugged his neck, responding to him wholeheartedly. Well, she actually wanted him too. Just as they were about to meet in the Red City, a white light suddenly shrouded Shinjuli. After a while, the white light dissipated, and Shinjuli's figure appeared again. Both of them froze at the same time. Shinjuli, who looked like a baby, sat on Ning Xuema. The white robe he was wearing could change its size according to his body. Now, the large white robe had become a small robe. The white robe was loose, and one could faintly see the fair and delicate skin underneath. Ning Xuema, Shinjuli. Chapter 24:48. He cursed under his breath and rolled to the side. Then, he wrapped his robe tightly around his small body. The second punishment had arrived. He had returned to being a child. Ning Xuema also sat up. As she looked at him who had turned into a 7 or 8-year-old child, she couldn't help but laugh. She lifted him up and kissed him on the forehead. "Little fellow, we've already completed the first mission. We should go find the heavenly Tao stone and ask about the second mission." She loved to tease little Shotas the most, especially the great god that had turned into a little Shota. She loved him so much that she couldn't bear to part with him. A moment ago, he had been touching her up and down, but now she wanted to touch him up and down. Not only had she kissed him on the forehead, but she had also pinched his arms and legs. They had felt extremely good to the touch. His skin was soft and smooth like tofu, making one want to take a bite or two. She had really bitten him twice, on his arm. Of course, she couldn't bear to bite him. She had only used her teeth to lightly grind against him. Just these 2 bites had left 2 rows of shallow teeth marks on his delicate skin. As she was playing with him, she suddenly sensed something. She looked up and her heart skipped a beat. Shinjioli lowered his eyes to look at her. His lips were curved in a faint smile. His eyes were as deep as the sea, and the waves of light seemed as if they would drown her. He clearly had the appearance of a child, but his eyes were like an adult's. This caused Ning Xuema's heart to skip a beat. "You can continue." Shinjioli calmly laid down in her arms. Not only did he not have the slightest intention of avoiding her groping, but he even put on a posture of allowing her to do whatever she wanted. He leaned his head down and rested his chin on her shoulder. His small mouth nearly bit her ear. "Xuema, I seem to have told you that even if I return to being a child, I am still an adult in certain aspects. I can still do adult things. Do you want to give it a try?" Ning Xuema. She didn't have such a heavy taste. She dryly laughed and quickly placed him on the ground. She quickly changed the topic. "Should we go to Carefree Island to look for the heavenly Tao stone?" Shinjioli flicked his little robe and said indifferently, "We'll go find it in 3 days." He didn't want Rong Wutian to see him like this, in case that fellow suffered internal injuries from holding back her laughter. Fortunately, he had already completed one of the heavenly Tao's punishments. This time, he would only return to his youth for 3 days. It wouldn't be too late for him to look for the heavenly Tao stone after 3 days. Ning Xuema understood Shinjioli's thoughts. She rolled her eyes and said, "Why don't we go to the highest peak of Tianshu Mountain? Perhaps he would recover faster there." Shinjioli shook his head slightly. His return to youth this time was different from before. Cultivating in the Heavenly Book Mountains was of no use. Just as he was about to say something, the sky outside suddenly darkened, as if dark clouds had covered the sun. Ning Xuema subconsciously raised her head to take a look and saw a huge blue object floating in the air. Her eyes suddenly widened. Qilin. It was actually a water kirin. The kirin was the size of a small mountain. Its scales were as large as bowls, and they were like blue jade that shimmered under the moonlight. Its wings stretched out, blocking out the moonlight. At this time, its 2 brilliant eyes were searching downwards. Its mouth was muttering to itself, "Strange, I clearly smelled Master's aura here, so how come I can't find it?" Its voice was rough and hoarse, but it didn't lose its clarity. "You must have smelled wrong again. Your sense of smell has never been so sensitive. You've made this mistake more than once, oh." Chapter 2449. You must have smelled wrongly again. Your sense of smell has never been that sensitive and you have made this mistake more than once. A delicate female voice sounded out. Ning Xuema looked towards the direction of the voice and realized that there was a fire phoenix circling above the Qilin. That fire phoenix was much smaller than the water qilin and was covered by the qilin's figure. If it didn't make a sound, Ning Xuemo wouldn't be able to see it. I clearly felt it the most obvious this time. The water qilin was unconvinced. I have heard this sentence 10 times in the past 100 years. I have heard it so many times that calluses are forming in my ears. The fire phoenix exposed its shortcomings without holding back. Hong Ti, if you think I can't find it, you can find it yourself. The water qilin was also unhappy. If I can find it myself, why would I follow you? Do you think I want to be together with a stupid qilin? The fire phoenix was also angry. The scales on the water qilin's body stood up. It was originally anxious because it missed again, and now it was agitated by the fire phoenix's words. It was instantly enraged and flapped its wings. Hong Ti, I have tolerated you for a long time. The flapping of its wings created a hurricane and blew the fire phoenix up above, causing it to stagger and lose 2 of its feathers. The fire phoenix's eyes were completely red. Stinky qilin. You dare to make a move on me. It flapped its wings and raging flames burst out from its wings. A ball of flames rolled towards the water qilin. The water qilin had only fanned the wind and didn't expect the other party to immediately set fire to it. This fire was the red lotus hellfire that could burn everything. It was obvious that this phoenix was truly angry. The water qilin was also angry and didn't want to be outdone. It opened its mouth and a huge wave of water pounced towards the red lotus hellfire. Chi! Water could subdue fire, not to mention that this water was the qilin's true yang water, which could subdue all the fire in the world. The red lotus hellfire that the fire phoenix fanned out was scattered by the water and not a single spark was left. Not to mention, a strand of water even splashed onto the fire phoenix's body. Although it didn't cause any substantial damage to it, it still drenched its feathers and made it look like a drowned rat. Fire phoenix. You. That pair of ruby-like eyes had tears rolling around. You bullied me. The water qilin raised his head to look at the sorry figure of the fire phoenix and was stunned. I didn't do it on purpose. It also knew that it was in trouble. After thinking for a while, it flapped its wings again, trying to dry its feathers. This time, the wind was much gentler, but the fire phoenix obviously did not buy it. Its figure flashed and dodged the wind. Blinking its eyes, tears rolled down its cheeks. You bully me because I can't find Master. I don't want to be with you anymore. I'll go find him myself. He turned around and was about to fly away. The water qilin hurriedly stopped it. I already said that I didn't do it on purpose. You spat out fire first. You were the one who fanned first. Fire phoenix shouted. All right, it's my fault, don't be angry. The water qilin held the thought of a good man not fighting with a woman and started to coax that phoenix. In order to make it happy, the water qilin even opened its mouth and blew out an even gentler wind. Come, let me dry your feathers. The fire phoenix snorted and shook its feathers, shaking off all the water. I don't need your hypocrisy, I can dry it myself. Although its mouth was still unforgiving, at least it didn't have the intention to fly away alone. It circled around the grassland on the hillside. There isn't even a single human hair here. Master is obviously not here. It's the last day of the month. If you still have monthly tickets, quickly throw them out. Wax. Chapter 2450. Ning Xuemo's eyes lit up when she saw the 2 flying creatures in the sky. They were Hong Ti and Little Apple. She did not expect the 2 of them to be together. They even found their way here. She was about to greet them when she felt a grip on her hand. Shinjioli held her hand. She looked at him in surprise. Shinjioli shook his head at her. Ning Xuema was stunned for a moment before she understood. The Almighty had returned to his youth. He did not want Little Apple and Hong Ti to see his current appearance. It seemed that she could not meet the two of them for the time being. She would wait for the Almighty to recover. Ning Xuema had just thought of this when there was a loud bang above her head. The impenetrable wizardry barrier broke on its own and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shinjioli was speechless. Ning Xuema was speechless. I did not do anything. The wizardry barrier broke and the two of them appeared on the grassy slope. Little Apple and Hong Ti, who were flying in the sky, had sharp eyes. They immediately cheered and rushed down. Master! Master, you really came back to life. I knew you would not die. Master, I did not look for you for 100 years in vain. I finally found you. Master, when did you come back to life? Where have you been for the past 100 years? Master, Hong Ti missed you so much. Master, Little Apple and Hong Ti turned into their human forms and surrounded Ning Xuema, chattering non-stop. They were too excited. Once they started talking, they could not stop. They threw out a series of questions. Ning Xuema did not know which one to answer first. They had not seen each other for 100 years. Both of them had changed a lot. After Little Apple turned into his human form, he looked like a 13 or 14-year-old boy. Although he still looked childish, he had the handsome looks of a teenager. His every move was vigorous. Hong Ti had also grown up quite a bit. She was much older than Little Apple, but her skills were not as high as Little Apple's. Her human form also looked younger than Little Apple's. She looked like she was 11 or 12 years old. Her fiery red body made her look very spirited. Hong Ti had always been clingy. The moment she saw Ning Xuema, she stuck to her side, her small hand holding onto Ning Xuema's sleeve without letting go. Little Apple had also forgotten that he was already a handsome young man. The moment he saw Ning Xuema, he instinctively leaned over, wishing that Ning Xuema could pat his head again. However, before he could reach Ning Xuema, he was stopped by a gaze. That gaze was like an icy spring, causing Little Apple to shiver all over. He raised his head and his gaze met the eyes of the child in Ning Xuema's arms. That child's appearance was naturally indescribable. She was unbelievably beautiful, but her aura was extremely intimidating at such a young age. Oh! Especially the pair of dark blue eyes, which made Little Apple, who had always been bold, tremble in fear. He blurted out, Master, who is this baby in your arms? Is it little Nianmo? He is already so big. He looks so handsome, just like you. Shinjioli was speechless. Ning Xuema couldn't help but laugh. The great master looked like her. She looked at Shinjioli teasingly. Shinjioli glanced at Little Apple coldly. Little Apple, are you blind? Can't you even recognize me? When he spoke, he used his real voice. Little Apple trembled and suddenly widened his eyes. D. Zun. Little Hong Ti was also shocked. She had always been afraid of Shinjioli. Chapter 2451. She also trembled and subconsciously let go of Ning Xuema's skirt. She took a step back and blurted out, Zun. How did Zun become so small? Is it a fetish? The long river settings includes fluttering Hong Ti revealed its original form. When it spread its wings, even the sunset lost its color. Ning Xuema sat on Hong Ti's back. In order to show off its ability, Hong Ti flew as fast as lightning. The clouds passed under its wings, and it flew very happily. Compared to the cheerful Hong Ti, Little Apple was much more miserable. It also revealed its original form. On its back was a baby version of Shinjioli. This great god was pocket-sized, but his aura was not pocket-sized at all. He was still shockingly powerful. More importantly, he had too many things to do. This great god's destination was the Tianshu mountain. Ning Xuema naturally wanted to follow him. Kiran and Hong Ti both wanted to carry their master. According to Ning Xuema's idea, she and the great god should ride together so that she could take care of him. However, this great god did not know what was wrong with his brain. He actually suggested that the two of them ride on two separate horses. Moreover, he chose Kiran to be his mount. Hong Ti won the right to ride its master, so it naturally cheered. It carried Ning Xuema and flew away. It chatted with its master all the way, and its feathers were dancing happily. Kiran was angry but did not dare to say anything. After revealing its original form, it bowed and asked Dizun to jump on its back. However, it did not expect Dizun to be so fussy at this time. He did not want to jump on its back himself. Instead, he asked Kiran to shrink to the size of a small horse. Then, he bowed and asked Dizun to step on its own. After Dizun sat down, he asked Kiran to grow bigger and fly away. Kiran was an impatient person. When it saw Hong Ti carrying Ning Xuema far away, its heart was already burning. As soon as Dizun sat down, it immediately returned to its original size. It flapped its wings and was about to fly away. Fly flat. You must be steady. The ancestor's finger tapped on its scales as he coldly instructed. Kiran's body stiffened. He no longer dared to fly recklessly and could only fly steadily. After flying, it realized that this venerable sovereign was extraordinarily troublesome. It couldn't fly fast, nor could it fly slowly. It couldn't dive or soar into the sky. It had to fly steadily like an airplane. It still had to set up a barrier for the old man because he was afraid of the wind. If the wind got a little stronger, he would take off its Chilan plate. Kiran's speed was originally much faster than Hong Ti, but now, it could no longer catch up to Hong Ti, because the old man on its back was moving at a constant speed. Kiran was full of resentment. He did not understand what the Almighty was up to. It also sensed the Almighty on its back. He was meditating on its back with his eyes lowered like a Buddha. The little Chilan listened to little Hong Ti and Ning Xuema's chatter in front of him. Then, he looked at the silent great deity on top of him, who clearly didn't have any intention of talking. He didn't give up and had a belly full of questions he wanted to ask. Dizun, how did my master come back to life? There was no response from its back. Little Apple felt a little suffocated and changed the topic. Dizun, where is little Nianmo? He should have been born, right? Why don't I see him? There was still no response from its back. The Almighty seemed to have fallen asleep on its back and did not respond at all. A ball of fire ignited in Little Apple's heart. It shook its body in dissatisfaction. Dizun, please say something. Chapter 2452. Shinjiuli, who was on its back, was caught off guard. He slipped on its back and almost fell off. Shinjiuli's scales suddenly tightened. He grabbed one of its protruding scales and said, Little Apple, do you want me to peel off your skin? Why are you shaking? Little Apple was also shocked. It didn't expect that its shaking would have such a big effect. With Dizun's martial arts, even if it did a few backflips in the air, he should be able to sit as steady as Mount Tai, right? Dizun, did you? Dizun not only became smaller, but also lost his martial arts. Shut up. Shinjiuli only replied with 2 words. As expected, Little Apple stopped talking. Without waiting for his orders, it flew quickly and steadily. After Shinjiuli steadied himself, he looked at Ning Xuema, who was on the flying phoenix in front of him. He exhaled slightly and closed his eyes again. This time, he had returned to his youth. It was really different from before. Previously, even if he had the appearance of a child, he would at most lose a lot of his psychokinesis. It wouldn't be like this time, where all his psychokinesis disappeared without a trace. Right now, he was no different from an ordinary 4 or 5-year-old child. Without any psychokinesis, any ordinary person could beat him down. It seemed that the punishment of the heavenly Tao was really abnormal. Fortunately, this punishment only lasted for 3 days. After 3 days, he would recover and then deal with the second pair. After he realized that he had lost all his psychokinesis, he didn't want Ning Xuema to find out. He also didn't want her to take care of him like a child, so he chose to share the ride with her. He had left a barrier on Tianshu Mountain. After arriving at Tianshu Mountain, he would bring Ning Xuema into the barrier to recuperate. It wouldn't be too late to come out after 3 days. His plan was good, and there were no loopholes. However, plans could never keep up with changes. The unforeseen event seemed to have happened in an instant. Shinjioli was meditating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and suddenly opened his eyes. Clouds were floating in front of him, and the sky above was blue like a gem. He couldn't see anything unusual. However, Shinjioli sensed danger in this calm and tranquility. There was some unknown danger approaching him at a high speed. Dodge to the left. He suddenly shouted. Kirin, on the other hand, was not aware of any danger. It was flying steadily. When it suddenly heard Shinjioli's order, it was stunned. It was at this moment that a pitch-black vortex suddenly appeared 3 to 4 meters ahead of them. The whirlpool was obviously not a good thing. The little Qilin was shocked and hurriedly dodged to the left. But, it was too late. Its speed was too fast, and the distance between them was too close. Although it tried its best to dodge to the left, it still could not stop its momentum and crashed into the whirlpool. The power of the whirlpool was astonishing. Kirin felt as if he had been sucked into a huge hole with a strong suction force. The wind was howling inside the hole, and he could no longer struggle out. He could only let out a scream before he was sucked into the whirlpool and disappeared. Ning Xuema and Hong Ti were flying ahead when they suddenly heard Kirin scream. Ning Xuema immediately turned around, and her expression changed. The whirlpool that had appeared out of nowhere behind them was like a tornado, making a terrifying sound. However, Kirin, who was flying behind them, was nowhere to be seen. Great God! Little Apple! Ning Xuema acted almost without thinking. Her figure rose up like a flowing cloud, flying towards the direction of the whirlpool while shouting loudly. There was no response. The surrounding blue sky and white clouds were the same. There was no trace of anyone. Chapter 24:53. Only the mouth of the whirlpool was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Needless to say, they had been sucked in. Master, this is a space-time whirlpool. You can't go. Hong Ti also turned and flew over, wanting to stop Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema did not stop at all. She jumped into the whirlpool, leaving Hong Ti with only one sentence, Hong Ti, you don't have to follow me. No matter what dangers lay ahead, she would advance and retreat together with Shinjioli. There was no reason for her to abandon him. As for Hong Ti, after all, the dangers ahead were unknown. She did not want Hong Ti to take the risk with her. Hong Ti was stunned. Seeing that the whirlpool was about to swallow Ning Xuema, it shouted, Master, wait for Hong Ti. It closed its eyes and jumped into the whirlpool as well. The whirlpool and the sky disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Just as the 2 people and the 2 beasts were swallowed by the whirlpool also suddenly disappeared in the sky, as if it had never appeared. Ning Xuemo did not know how many space-time transmigrations she had experienced in her life and how many whirlpools she had jumped into. Only this time was the most ecstatic and soul-stirring experience. The whirlpool was inky black, and there was no light at all. The whirlwind around her was at least level 13, and it could tear a person apart alive. What was worse was that after jumping into the whirlpool, her psychokinesis seemed to be sealed by an inexplicable force. She could not even set up a protective enchantment. She could only spin crazily in the whirlpool along with the whirlwind. While she was spinning, she tried her best to open her eyes and call out the names of Shinjuli and Little Apple. However, she did not get any response. Not only was the whirlpool pure black, it could also swallow all sound. She had called out very loudly, but when she called out, it sounded like a weak cat meowing. Compared to the crazy howling wind around her, it was simply negligible. In the end, she simply stopped calling out, closed her eyes, and opened all the sensory organs in her body, trying to find out the whereabouts of Shinjuli. But he still couldn't sense it. Her fingers clenched tighter and tighter. She was now a devil master, and her skills were astonishing. Once she activated her sensing technique, she could sense the movements within a radius of 10 miles. Even if a fly flew past 10 miles away, she would be able to sense it accurately. But now, she could sense Hong Ti and Little Apple, but she couldn't sense Shinjuli. She was getting more and more flustered as she desperately told herself to calm down. Shinjuli was a god. Even if he had returned to his youth, he still had a lot of skills left. With his ability, even if he fell into the space-time vortex, he would be fine. He must have the ability to protect himself. In this whirlpool, no one could make their own decisions. They could only rotate along with the whirlpool. Ning Xuemo had the misconception that she was being dragged into the depths of hell by a hurricane. However, at this time, she could only go with the flow. The only thing she could do was to adjust her body from time to time, desperately trying to get closer and closer to the little Qilin. Pooh! In the high-speed rotation, Ning Xuemo seemed to have broken through a space-time door. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and a white light rushed toward her. In the next moment, her body seemed to have rushed out from the ground and directly shot up into the sky. Fortunately, although she had lost her psychokinesis, she still had her inner strength. She turned in the air and floated down to the ground. Zhang Xian glanced around and was taken aback. This place seemed to be a glacier. She was surrounded by high and low ice peaks in all directions. She was surrounded by white snow, and all she could see was a silvery white. Where did the great god go? It's the first of the month. Most of you have guaranteed monthly votes. Vote, vote, use your monthly votes to summon the great god. Chapter 2454. What was this place? What world was this? Ning Xuemo didn't have time to think about these. Her eyes anxiously looked around, looking for Shinjuli's figure. She couldn't see anyone around her, and she couldn't hear anyone's voice. She didn't give up. She jumped up, found the highest peak, and then bent down to look around. She should be in a glacier valley. There were countless ice towers and ice mushrooms. She stood at the highest point, so she could see everything around her. She didn't find Shinjuli's figure, but she saw Hong Ti. That little phoenix just came out of the ice nest and looked around in confusion. Finally, it saw Ning Xuemo's figure in the distance. It immediately spread its wings and flew over. Master. Ning Xuemo and Hong Ti met up. Hong Ti came out later than Ning Xuemo, so it didn't see Little Apple and Shinjuli's figure. Unfortunately, Hong Ti had no sense of direction, and its sense of smell wasn't very sensitive. Ning Xuemo's idea of relying on it to find people fell through. Ning Xuemo lost her telekinesis and couldn't fly. Fortunately, Although Hong Ti was dizzy from the whirlpool, it wasn't really injured, so it didn't lose its flying ability. It carried Ning Xuemo and flew up, looking for people within a radius of 100 miles. Since they came through a whirlpool, the place where they landed shouldn't be too far away. Ning Xuemo estimated that it shouldn't be more than 100 miles away. But after she rode on the little phoenix and searched for half an hour, she still couldn't find Little Apple and Shinjuli's whereabouts. Could it be that the whirlpool could bring people to different places in different eras? Ning Xuemo knew that a lot of time and space whirlpools had this problem. Thinking of this, she panicked a little. If she and the great god were in different eras, then how could she meet him? She secretly took a breath and made up her mind. First, she would search around here. If she really couldn't find anything, she would find a way to travel back to Tianci continent. Presumably, if Shinjuli could not find her, he would also travel back to that place. Only then would the two of them have a chance to meet. Fortunately, she and Shinjuli were a demon and a god respectively, so their skills were not low. No matter which era they traveled to, they still had the ability to protect themselves, so there would not be any accidents. She comforted herself in her heart as she searched in this world of ice and snow. Master, there's an ice cave below us. Could they be hiding there? Little Red Tea cried out. Let's go down and take a look. Ning Xuemo's eyes also lit up. She had searched the ground within a radius of 100 miles, but she couldn't find the shadow of the man and the beast. Now that she saw an ice cave, she naturally wouldn't let it go. It was an uncanny workmanship. It would not be an exaggeration to call this ice cave the work of the gods. The cave was extremely deep, and icy blue light flickered inside, just like the legendary Crystal Palace. Ning Xuemo stood at the entrance of the cave and looked at it for a moment. This cave was not formed naturally, but was dug out by humans. And looking at the traces, it was carved out by a treasured sword or some other sharp weapon, and not by a special ice chiseling tool. She was a little puzzled. The ice of the glacier had been cold since ancient times and was as hard as diamond. Even if a special ice chiseling tool was used, it might not be able to carve out the desired shape. Who used a treasured sword to carve out such an ice cave? She touched the wall of the cave with her fingers and confirmed that this ice cave was carved out by the same treasured sword. In other words, it was done by one person. Ning Xuemo looked into the cave. The cave was too deep, and she couldn't see the bottom. She also couldn't see what was in the cave. Chapter 2455. If a person was stranded here and wanted to rest, he should have chiseled the ice to build an ice house, right? Instead of chiseling this ice cave, which obviously required a lot of energy, Ning Xuemo was puzzled. Master, there seems to be something inside. Hong Ti sniffed hard and reported to her. Since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. Ning Xuemo decided to go in and take a look. The ice cave was actually a huge hole with many small holes inside. It had many twists and turns, and there were forks in the road from time to time. What was even more surprising was that there was actually a mechanism inside. The mechanism was also very advanced, and it was often triggered by a slight movement. As long as there was a slight movement, there would be a series of hidden weapons shooting out. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo was an expert in the art of mechanisms, and she could often detect the location of the mechanism with just one glance. She took Hong Ti and avoided it directly, which was a daunting experience. The more Ning Xuemo walked in, the more surprised she became. It was definitely not the work of a single person to dig such an ice cave, and the layout of the cave looked like the structure of an Egyptian pyramid. It should have a strong anti-corrosive effect. What was hidden in this ice cave? Could it be a treasure cave of some robbers? She still could not sense the breath of Shinjuli and Kirin. She wanted to go back the way she came several times, but she was unwilling. What if he was here? She walked for a while and suddenly stopped. There was an ice room in front of her, and there was an ice bed in the ice room. There was an ice coffin on the ice bed, and there was a person in the ice coffin. Ning Xuema cursed in a low voice. Bad luck. It turned out that this ice cave was not a treasure cave, but a special tomb. She had accidentally broken into someone's tomb. Master, she is so beautiful. Right now, Ning Xuema was not the slightest bit interested in things like coffins and tombs. Originally, she wanted to turn around and leave, but Hong Ti had a curious temperament and had already flown above the ice coffin to check it out. After looking for a moment, she let out a cry of surprise and praise. Master, come and take a look. She seems to be alive. Alive? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat, and she looked into the ice coffin. Her eyesight was very good. Although the ice cave was a little dark, she could still see everything in the cave. She finally saw the appearance of the person in the ice coffin, and her heart trembled slightly. Inside the ice coffin was a young girl. She looked to be about 15 or 16 years old and was wearing a pink robe with peach blossoms. Her black hair covered her forehead and a half-moon-shaped pink jade hairpin was inserted into her sideburns. Her long eyelashes were curled up and covered half of her face. Her skin was like jade and her cheeks were white with a touch of pink. Her full red lips were pink and pouty. Her entire person was so delicate that it seemed like water could be squeezed out with a pinch. This young girl was extremely beautiful, and it was the kind of pure and tender beauty that made people want to take pity on her and protect her in the palm of their hand. Devastatingly beautiful, these 4 words were truly worthy of being used on her. Looking at her dress and appearance, this young girl was like the kind of girl that was cherished in the palm of one's hand. She did not know the ways of the world, but she was an innocent girl. She did not know why she had withered here and was placed in this ice coffin. Ning Xuema looked at the young girl in the coffin for a moment, and her heart suddenly skipped a beat. The young girl's lips were slightly raised, as if there was a trace of a cold smile, with a touch of mockery and a touch of relief. She was frozen there. She gave people a kind of resolute beauty, and it was quite soul-stirring. Master, she is still alive, right? Hong Ti wandered around the ice coffin. The ice coffin was very thick, and it could not touch the young girl in the coffin at all. It could only see that the young girl's face was alive, as if she would open the coffin lid and sit up in the next moment. Oh. Chapter 2456. No, she's dead. Ning Xuema said with certainty. Although she had lost her telekinesis, she was still a medical expert. She could see the girl's state at a glance. The girl was dead, and her soul had been scattered. Ning Xuema had a strange perception of souls. Normally, after a person died, there would be a few remnant souls remaining in the body. However, there was not a single remnant soul in this girl's body. What was left in the ice coffin was only a beautiful body. Is she dead? What a pity. She's so beautiful. Hong Ti was talking endlessly. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and did not say anything. She pulled Hong Ti to prevent it from moving around. She did not want to accidentally activate any mechanism and open the ice coffin. She had opened the crystal coffin out of curiosity and released Shuailan. She had a lot of trouble for no reason. She had long been traumatized by this kind of thing, so she was not curious at all. Not to mention that there was only a beautiful girl in the ice coffin, even if there was a peerless weapon inside, she would not be tempted. She quickly looked around the ice room to make sure there was no one else in the ice room. She then pulled Hong Ti and left. Let's go. Hong Ti was still reluctant to leave. Master, is this the legendary treasure coffin? I saw a beautiful dagger in the ice coffin. It was inlaid with a pigeon egg-sized ruby. Ning Xuemo did not turn her head. For her, not to mention a pigeon egg-sized ruby, even an egg-sized diamond would not be able to move her heart. She just wanted to find Shinjiuli and confirm his safety. Since Shinjiuli was not here, she would go somewhere else to look for him. Although Hong Ti was reluctant, it could not disobey its master. So, it followed her out. When they were about to reach the entrance of the cave, Ning Xuemo suddenly sensed something. She pulled Hong Ti and flew into a narrow side cave to hide their bodies. Hong Ti was now in her human form. She knew when to advance and when to retreat. When she saw Ning Xuemo's actions, she knew that someone was coming. She hid behind Ning Xuemo and only revealed her eyes to look outside the cave. The sound of clothes fluttering in the wind came from outside the cave. A moment later, the cave entrance darkened and a person walked in. Hong Ti's eyes lit up. Handsome guy. According to Little Apple, he was a handsome guy who was extremely beautiful. That person looked to be in his 20s. He was tall and straight and wore a loose purple robe. He had a handsome face and deep facial features. His thin lips were slightly pursed. His entire person was like a silhouette of flowing light, making the surrounding snow lose its color. That person had a pair of extremely black eyes that were deep and dark. His entire person gave off a feeling of elegance and indifference. However, the corners of his lips faintly carried a trace of the evil aura of a silk pants, bringing along a bewitching and seductive feeling. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. She was very good at judging people. This person's temperament was extraordinary. There was a kind of elegance and nobility of a person who had been in a high position for a long time. He should be someone who held great power and was full of vigor. In this world, his status was definitely not low. But why would such a person appear here alone at this moment? There was also a kind of cold and lonely feeling on his body. It was as if he was shrouded in a kind of invisible despair and indifference. This person's martial arts were obviously very high. Even though he was walking normally, his landing was silent. He took large strides into the cave, but there was not the slightest movement. His movements were as smooth as flowing water. Ning Xuemo was a martial arts expert. Seeing this, she could not help but applaud this person's martial arts. Chapter 2457. In terms of Kung Fu, this person's Kung Fu should have reached the peak. He should be a master of his generation. This person looked so young, but his Kung Fu was so high. Obviously, he was a peerless genius. Coupled with his appearance, he should be doing well in this world, right? After Ning Xuemo came to this world, the psychokinesis in her body disappeared without a trace. This made her suspect that psychokinesis did not exist in this world. Now that she saw this person again, she was even more certain of this point. She could not help but think of Shinjiuli. He was in the process of returning to his youth. Without the protection of psychokinesis, it would be difficult for him to survive in this world with the strength of a 4 or 5-year-old child. Where would he be? Was he in danger now? The more she thought about it, the more anxious she became. It was as if she was on fire. The ice valley Ning Xuemo landed in was very strange. She searched the area within 100 miles. There was only ice and snow. Not to mention people, she did not see anyone breathing. Now, this person was the only living person she met. She thought for a while and gestured to Hong Ti, indicating that she should wait in place. She quietly followed him. The person seemed to have a lot of things on his mind. Or maybe he was used to there being no one here. He was not on guard at all, so he did not notice Ning Xuemo following behind him. He walked around in the ice cave. Looking at the direction he was heading, it was the ice room where the ice coffin was hidden. The person's footsteps were originally hurried, but when he was about 10 steps away from the ice room, he suddenly stopped and looked up at the ice room. He stood there motionless. Ning Xuema secretly calculated the distance between them. Her heart skipped a beat. From his position, he could see the ice coffin. The person stared at the ice coffin. His whole body seemed to be petrified, as if he had turned into a statue. Ning Xuema was standing not far behind him, so she couldn't see his expression clearly. She could only faintly feel a touch of desolation and grief emanating from him. His back was tall and straight, yet it was deathly still. "Ah, I'm here to see you again." After a while, he finally spoke. The voice was hoarse and low, as if it was trying hard to suppress something. That was all he said. He didn't say anything else. He just stared, and stared without moving. Ning Xuema was almost worried that this person would become a fossil. She also took a look inside the cave and guessed what was going on. The girl in the ice coffin should be this man's lover, right? This hole was made by this man. Was it specially used to store the corpses of lovers? She couldn't tell that this man was such an infatuated man. However, his little lover seemed to have been poisoned to death. With this man's status, he wondered if he had avenged her. Ning Xuema had always had a good impression of infatuated men, so after pondering for a moment, she decided to disturb this man. Her figure flashed as she walked out from the shadows. "Brother, please." The man's body stiffened, and he suddenly turned around. At the same time, countless tiny silver lights shot towards Ning Xuema like a storm. Ning Xuema, how could such an elegant and handsome man kill people without saying a word? With her kung fu, she naturally wouldn't be hit by those hidden weapons. Her figure flashed, and her palm drew an arc in the air. A moment later, the silver light hidden weapons were all in her hands. They were a bunch of silver needles, and there were about 40 to 50 of them. If she had dodged a little slower, she would have become a silver hedgehog by now. She weakly asked for a monthly vote and a recommendation vote. Mwah. Chapter 2458. It was a handful of silver needles, about 40 to 50 of them. If she had dodged a little slower, she would have turned into a silver hedgehog by now. Ning Xuema weighed the silver needles in her hand. The silver needles danced in her palm like flashing lights. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Why do you want to kill me?" The man did not expect her to be able to catch his silver needles. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who are you? How did you get in?" Ning Xuema paused the silver needles in her palm. Judging from the man's tone, could this be a forbidden area? If this was a forbidden area, it was understandable that she could not see anyone else here. However, the forbidden area was usually restricted to humans. Here, she could not even see other breathing creatures. She raised her head and looked at the man. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat. That man seemed to be casually standing there, but the angle and posture he was standing at was the best. He could attack or defend if he wanted to. He even intentionally or unintentionally blocked the entrance of the ice room, blocking all of Ning Xuema's paths to sneak attack the ice coffin. She actually met someone of the same profession. This person must have been an assassin or something like that. He was always looking for the best angle to attack. Ning Xuema suddenly moved. The man only felt that his eyes were dazzled. The girl in front of him suddenly changed her angle and led him to turn half a circle involuntarily. Ning Xuema stood on a piece of ice stone. The man narrowed his eyes slightly. It turned out that Ning Xuema had turned the situation around just now. She was originally standing in a position that was not good for defense. However, she only took a few steps and turned into a blind spot. Now, he was at a disadvantage again, this woman not only had amazing skills, but she was also an expert in sneak attacks. Are you an assassin? The man said coldly. He took a step back without batting an eyelid. This step was just right, allowing him to slightly turn the tables on himself. Ning Xuema's lips curved into a smile as her figure rushed forward. The man was also on guard. His body naturally rotated along with her, and the sword in his hand was unsheathed. Ning Xuema did not bring any weapons with her. At her level of cultivation, she could easily use her telekinesis to form any weapon. However, after transmigrating to this world, her telekinesis had disappeared, so she could not form any weapon. At this moment, she could only fight with her opponent empty-handed. Although she had been strengthening her psychokinesis all these years, she had not neglected the cultivation of her inner force. Moreover, she was originally a secret agent, so her grappling skills were not ordinary. After so many years of living on the line between life and death, she had trained her skills to be as slippery as a fox. Ning Xuema was better than Shinjiuli when it came to adaptability and internal strength in a fight. If she claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. No matter which world she was in, she would be a top figure. She did not expect to meet her match here. Ning Xuema used her empty-handed blade blocking Kung Fu several times in an attempt to snatch his sword, but he dodged her every time. This person's movements were extremely fast and his psychokinesis was extremely high. When he surrounded Ning Xuema and fought, his movements were so fast that they were like a continuous stream of afterimages, causing people to be dazzled. What was even more frightening was that each of his sword strikes were extremely crafty and precise, all of them aimed to take people's lives. Ning Xuema did not know how many people she had fought with in her life, but this person was the most difficult to deal with. Needless to say, this person was also the kind of person who had experienced life and death situations for a long time. She did not know how many people's blood and lives had fed him such skills. Chapter 2459. It was not rare to see people with high skills, but only an assassin could have such a ruthless and exquisite move. This person should be an outstanding person in power, but she did not expect that he used to be an assassin. Ning Xuema originally did not care much about this person, but now she felt a little sympathy for him. After that person and Ning Xuema fought for dozens of moves, his eyes flashed with a touch of surprise. It was obvious that he did not expect the woman in front of him to have such a high level of skill. This made him even more shocked, and a dark light flashed in his eyes. His moves were more ruthless, and it was obvious that he wanted to kill her. In the fierce battle, Ning Xuema's figure suddenly flew towards the ice room. The man's face changed, and he desperately tried to stop her. Originally, during the fight, his defense was watertight. However, with his desperate attempt to block her attack, an opening appeared below his ribs. Ning Xuema's body spun around, taking advantage of this opportunity to close in on him. Her two fingers were like swords, directly poking at his groin. Clang! The sword in the man's hand fell to the ground, and his whole body was fixed there, unable to move. Ning Xuema clapped her hands and looked at him. Your skills are not bad. You used to be an assassin, right? The man pursed his lips and did not answer, but looked at her with a faint sharp gaze. Who are you? Who sent you? Ning Xuema sighed. I'm just a passerby, brother. You don't have to be so nervous like a hedgehog. Now I'll ask you a few questions, and I hope you can answer me sincerely. The man's eyes flashed slightly, and he obviously did not believe Ning Xuema's words, but he was under her control now, so he did not point it out. He only said two words, you can ask. What continent and what country is this? What year is it? The man's eyes showed surprise, as if he did not expect her to control him just to ask these two idiotic questions. He did not understand what Ning Xuema was trying to do, so he pondered for a moment, and answered truthfully, Cloud Underworld Continent, Jiu Country, the 2nd year of Kaiyuan. A completely unfamiliar dynasty. Ning Xuema sighed inwardly. An inexplicable space-time vortex had brought her here. It was really inexplicable. How was she going to go back? I wonder if there is a space-time tunnel in the sky here. She continued to ask a few more questions and found out that this glacier was called Forgotten River. It was located 100 li away from the capital of Jiu Country and had a radius of 500 li. Almost everyone in Jiu Country knew about these questions, so the man had nothing to hide. Ning Xuema also knew that the questions she asked were idiotic in the eyes of her countrymen. She glanced at the man, thinking that he would look at her as if she was an idiot. However, she didn't expect that his eyes would remain as calm as water, making it impossible for others to guess what he was thinking. This person was truly a scheming person. Ning Xuema glanced at the man's face. Who are you? Jiu Country's prince. This person had a kind of kingly aura, so his status should not be low. The man slightly choked and replied indifferently, I am just a poor person. He did not directly answer Ning Xuema's question. Ning Xuema was actually too lazy to know the other person's identity. She had just asked him randomly. She also asked about the specific topography and characteristics of Forgotten River, so that it would be more convenient to find Shinjiuli. The man answered all of her questions. Ning Xuema nodded in satisfaction. Before she left, she glanced at the ice room and her gaze turned to the ice coffin. Chapter 2460. Even if the man was restrained, he could still act as if nothing had happened. However, when Ning Xuema looked at the ice coffin, his body tensed up and a trace of nervousness flashed across his face. Although he was used to concealing his true feelings, his nervousness only lasted for a moment before disappearing. However, Ning Xuema, who was used to observing people's expressions, noticed it. She smiled and decided to give him a reminder as a reward for asking this question. You seem to be very worried about her. Then, do you know that she was poisoned to death? The man's eyes shrunk and he blurted out, How did you know? Ning Xuema did not answer and turned to leave. She had more important things to do and did not want to waste time here. Master. A tender voice was heard. Hong Ti could not help but run over. It showed its original form, which was a fiery red phoenix. Master, are you all right? Ning Xuema jumped onto the phoenix's back. I'm fine. Let's go. Hong Ti looked at the man who was restrained. Although it was puzzled, it still listened to Ning Xuema's words and flew out with Ning Xuema on its back. The cave was peaceful again. The man stood there and the surprise in his eyes could not be concealed. Phoenix. He actually saw a phoenix that had never existed in this world. Who was this girl who appeared out of nowhere? Her martial arts were extremely high and she knew nothing about this continent. She even had a phoenix as her mount. Was she a deity? His eyes flashed slightly and no one knew what he was thinking. The terrain of Wangchuan was very complicated. Ice peaks, ice towers, ice caves could be seen everywhere. There were even ice cracks. Looking for a person in such a complicated area was like looking for a needle in a haystack. In the process of searching, Ning Xuema finally met other people from this world. It was a group of guards in bright armor. These people were originally patrolling. When they suddenly saw a phoenix flying over their heads, it immediately caused a commotion. Many people cried out in surprise and rushed over, wanting to hunt this fire phoenix. Heavenly nets, flying arrows, flying stones, all kinds of weapons were used and attacked the fire phoenix like locusts. The psychokinesis on Hong Ti's body also disappeared without a trace. It couldn't even spit out fire. The hidden weapons that were flying towards it were not small in strength. It flapped its claws and wings and was having a hard time dealing with them. Ning Xuemo's figure rose. Her movements were as fast as lightning. Her whole body was like a red cloud as she circled around Hong Ti. A moment later, the concealed weapons surrounding Hong Ti disappeared without a trace. Ning Xuemo was standing on Hong Ti's back with an arrow in each of her hands. Her red dress was fluttering in the wind. She was like a fairy who had arrived on the wind. The group of guards was dumbfounded. Oh. They never thought that there would be someone on the back of the fire phoenix. Moreover, it was a woman with such high martial arts. She actually used her delicate hands to catch the hidden weapons that they shot out. It's impolite not to reciprocate. I'll return it to you. Ning Xuemo flicked her finger, and the long arrow in her hand flew back as if it had eyes. The guards were all taken down. Of course, Ning Xuemo didn't want their lives. The arrows that were shot back had already broken the arrowheads. The arrows that were shot on these people's bodies only sealed their acupuncture points. Of course, in order to teach them a lesson, Ning Xuemo still shot them until they suffered internal injuries. It would take at least 10 days to half a month for them to recover. After taking down these people, Ning Xuemo jumped down this time. She caught a person who looked like the leader and interrogated him for a while. Finally, she got some information. Chapter 2461. She cursed in her heart. That purple-robed man still lied to her. He didn't lie to her, but he didn't get to the point. This glacier was indeed called Wangchuan, and it was indeed 100 miles away from the capital, but it wasn't ownerless. It was a famous forbidden area of Jiyu country. Except for the king of Jiyu country, no one had the right to approach within 30 miles of the peak of Wangchuan. There was only one word for trespassers: death. And these guards were the guards of this forbidden area. They couldn't go up, so they could only patrol under the main peak of Wangchuan. The main peak of Wangchuan wasn't small. This circle was at least 100 miles, so there wasn't only one group of guards patrolling. There were dozens of other groups, guarding the main peak like an iron bucket. Even a fly wouldn't be able to fly in. No wonder she didn't see a single human hair when she was wandering around. It turned out that this was the case. Ning Xuemo thought of that purple-robed man. Needless to say, that person was the king of Jiyu country. He actually said that he was a destitute person. It wasn't strange for a king to have profound martial arts, but it was strange for him to be an assassin. Ning Xuemo was too lazy to pay attention to these guards. She rode on Little Phoenix and flew back. She wanted to directly capture the king and threaten him to help her find someone, but she couldn't find the entrance of the cave. She clearly left here for less than 2 hours. Her sense of direction was correct, so she wouldn't find the wrong place. Such a deep and serene cave actually disappeared into thin air. Only a bare ice cliff was left in the original place, and there wasn't any shadow of the cave entrance. Ning Xuemo turned around in the original place twice, and her eyes focused. Mechanism technique. Extremely profound mechanism technique. Just as she had guessed, this cave was not fixed at this place. Instead, it changed according to the time. Now, she did not know where it had changed to. Moreover, after the purple-robed man regained his freedom, he must have done something to the cave, causing it to disappear into thin air in such a short period of time. Ning Xuemo sighed. It was better to rely on herself than on anyone else. She had to rely on her own ability to find someone. She couldn't search like a headless fly. It seemed that she could only try her best. She asked Hong Ti to be her guard while she sat on the ground with her eyes closed. Her divine scent spread out from her body and specks of silver light spread out in all directions. This was the soul search technique, which used the power of the soul to search the surroundings. It could detect any movement within a radius of 300 miles in an instant. Using this method consumed a great deal of his source energy. Moreover, he couldn't be disturbed in the slightest. Otherwise, it would be very easy for him to suffer from chi deviation. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo already knew that this place was a forbidden area, and there wouldn't be any random people coming here. With Little Phoenix as her guard, she could rest assured and boldly use it. Little Phoenix stood guard by her side, not daring to breathe heavily as his pair of eyes looked around vigilantly, fearing that a wild rabbit would jump out and startle her. Half an hour later, Ning Xuemo quickly retracted the silver light she emitted. She opened her eyes while sweating profusely. She directly jumped onto the Little Phoenix's back. Southwest. She quickly told him a precise direction and let the Little Phoenix carry her. Without saying a word, Little Phoenix carried her and flew straight up. With a flap of his wings, he quickly flew towards that direction. In order to avoid alerting the other guards under the Forgotten River Glacier, Little Phoenix directly flew into the clouds and hid his figure. Only when he was about to fly to the direction that Ning Xuemo had mentioned did he swoop down. Little Phoenix finally saw everything on the ground and his pair of eyes suddenly widened. Oh! Chapter 2462. On the ground, Little Apple's body was trapped in a huge silver net. There were hundreds of guards surrounding the huge net. Some were pulling the net while some were shooting arrows and daggers that were smeared with green liquid into the net. Although Little Apple had lost its psychokinesis and could not use many skills, it was still very strong. The scales on its body were thick enough. Those arrows and daggers did not penetrate its scales and did not cause any substantial damage to it. It roared and struggled in the net. Its claws tore at the net and its teeth, causing the guards who were pulling the net to be thrown off. However, it was unknown what the net was made of. Little Apple's sharp claws and teeth could not tear it apart. The more it struggled, the tighter the net was wrapped around it. Those guards were obviously well trained. There were already dozens of people who were thrown off by Little Apple's terrifying strength. Their legs were broken and they were seriously injured. However, the others did not retreat. When one person fell, two more people would rush up to replace him. Catch it alive. Remember, you must catch it alive. Someone shouted. Understood. I did not expect that a Kirin would appear here. Capture it and present it to His Majesty. His Majesty will be happy. Boys, put in more effort. It's time to test your skills. There was a lot of shouting below. Those guards were excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They pulled the net even tighter and shot the arrows and daggers even faster. When Ning Xuemo arrived, the net was almost squeezed into Kirin's scales. Although those swords and arrows didn't pierce through its scales, they were shot by the Imperial bodyguards with profound skills. The little Qilin felt a piercing pain on its body and from time to time, it let out a muffled groan. This was really a case of a dragon in shallow water being played by shrimps. Hong Ti's eyes were blood red. Without waiting for Ning Xuemo's order, it folded its wings and rushed over. In the crowd's exclamation, Hong Ti had already caught two people and sent one person flying with a flap of its wings. God! It's a fire phoenix. There's actually another fire phoenix, let's catch it together. The guards became restless again. Just as they were about to send out a portion of their forces to deal with Hong Ti, a red light flashed in front of them. A red figure flashed past them like lightning. That figure was so fast that they couldn't see clearly whether the other party was round or flat. Amidst the exclamations, the guards who were holding onto the net felt their wrists tighten. It was as if they had been pierced by a sharp needle, and the pain was as if their wrists had been broken. Naturally, the hand holding the net loosened. All of this happened too fast. By the time the guards came to their senses, the Kirin that they had been entangled with for several hours had already spread its wings and flew into the air. At the same time, the small phoenix also flew into the air. On the back of the small phoenix, a red-clothed girl stood facing the wind. Immortal. Demon. These guards were bewildered. The girl looked down like a god overlooking all living beings. She was just standing there indifferently, but she had a kind of domineering aura that made those valiant guards involuntarily tremble in fear. Some of these people originally wanted to shoot the Kirin and phoenix that flew into the air, but after being swept by the girl's eyes, they couldn't help but tremble. Their bows and arrows dropped and they knelt down. Kirin and phoenix are under this lord's protection. If you hurt them again, you will die. The girl coldly opened her mouth. Her clear voice was full of coldness. These guards were 1 in 10,000 experts in GU country. Each of them was proud and arrogant. Chapter 2463. These guards were the best of the best in GU country. Each of them was proud and arrogant. Except for the monarch, they didn't listen to anyone else's orders. They didn't pay any heed to anyone's words, but after this young girl had shown her hand just now, and now with a cold glance, all of them felt as if they had been provoked by a cold spring. When they heard this young girl's order, they actually didn't dare to refute. The other party's powerful pressure made them unable to even raise their heads. You have been poisoned by this lord's heartbreak poison. If there is no antidote, you will die within 3 days. The woman's voice was cold, as if she had dropped a heavy bomb. The guard's complexion changed. Their wrists were all pierced by the other party's needle. At this moment, not only was the pain piercing their heart, the back of their hands had turned blue. It was a symptom of poisoning. The guards wanted to jump up and fight with the woman, but thinking of the other party's strange skill, they felt anxious. Each of them held the hilt of their sword and looked at their leader, waiting for his instructions. Either fight or show weakness. The leader of the guards was an opinionated person. He suppressed his panic and bowed to talk. We didn't know that this Kirin had an owner. We have offended you. We apologize to Your Excellency here. I hope that Your Excellency can give us the antidote for the sake of our monarch's face. The woman interrupted him. This lord doesn't know your monarch, why should I give him face? This sentence made the leader of the guards choke. He paused for a moment and said, Then what do you want us to do to give you the antidote? The woman glanced at him. Help me find a person. On the ice peak, the wind whistled. The snowflakes were as big as a mat, blowing so hard that people could hardly open their eyes. Ning Xuema stood on a stone in the snow. Her heart almost sank to the bottom of the ice. Kirin had just entered the whirlpool and was separated from Shinjiuli. Kirin also drilled out from the ground. It didn't see Shinjiuli's figure at all. When it drilled out, it was attacked by those people. Those guards caught it as a rare thing. If Ning Xuema and Little Phoenix didn't arrive in time, it was afraid that it would become more and more exhausted and finally be caught by these people. When Kirin was in the whirlpool, he did not see any trace of Shinjiuli. Where would he land? Was there any danger? Ning Xuema's face was pale, and her fingers were clenched tightly. Hong Ti comforted her. Master, the ancestors' martial arts are so profound. No matter where he goes, he won't be at a disadvantage. You can rest assured. What's more, didn't you ask the guards to help you search? Maybe we'll hear from him soon. Little Apple wanted to say something but stopped. Ning Xuema glanced at it. If you have something to say, say it. Stuttering isn't manly. Little Apple choked and finally mustered up her courage. Master, Dizun, his martial arts might not be that profound. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Little Apple told her everything that had happened to Shinjiuli along the way. Ning Xuema felt her legs go weak. It turned out that not only had Shinjiuli returned to his youth, he had also lost all of his martial arts. Why didn't he say it? If he had said it, even if she forced him, she would have tied herself to him and wouldn't leave him even an inch. It was also her fault. She had been used to thinking that he was the strongest. She didn't expect that he would be so weak after returning to his youth. She had always been observant, but she didn't expect that she would make such a big mistake this time. Regret was like the sea, almost drowning her whole body. Wouldn't he be torn apart by the whirlpool if he didn't have the slightest bit of power? Chapter 2464. Wouldn't he be torn apart by the whirlpool if he didn't have the slightest bit of skill? Would he freeze to death in this world of ice and snow? Would he encounter other ferocious beasts? All kinds of bad thoughts swirled in Ning Xuema's mind, making her heart feel heavy and painful, as if a 1,000-pound boulder had fallen on her. Master, what should we do now? Damn it, I've lost my telekinesis, so I can't cast any spells. Otherwise, how could those puny humans do anything to me? Kirin was still a little angry. Master, did you really poison them? These people are really damned. I didn't do anything, but they attacked me without saying anything. Kirin's scales were still a little painful, so it was unconvinced. Hong Ti was more attentive. It could see that Ning Xuema's mind was not focused at the moment, and knew that she was worried about Shinjiuli. Hearing Kirin's endless complaints, it stepped on its foot angrily and said, "What are you yelling for? Now, let's put revenge aside and look for the D-Zune first." Kirin finally stopped yelling. Ning Xuema took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Let's split up and look for him. The one that uses whistling as a signal." She told them the specific contact method, and the human, the bird, and the beast immediately split up. In the wind and snow, Ning Xuema flew across the snowy ground. Every time she traveled a certain distance, she would set up a barrier and cast the soul response technique, but every time she returned with no results. During the process of casting the technique, she could sense all kinds of animals in the snow, even a mouse, but there was no trace of Shinjiuli. The more she searched, the more anxious she became. The more she searched, the more impatient she became. Another 4 hours passed like this. The sky darkened, and the snow stopped. A full moon rose in the sky. Ning Xuema inadvertently looked up at the moon and was slightly stunned. The moon was actually a purple moon. The rich and beautiful purple color was very eye-catching in the dark blue sky, and it was also very beautiful. The snowy ground, the purple moon, the ice peak, what a beautiful scene it would be if she had a sweetheart to enjoy the scenery together. But now Ning Xuema was not in the mood to enjoy the scenery at all. It was late at night, and the surroundings were even colder. The temperature was at least 30 to 40 degrees below zero. She was wearing a treasured robe that was warm in winter and cool in summer, and her body was protected by internal force, but she could still feel the cold, and her hands and feet were a little uncomfortable. Shinjiuli did not practice his inner force, and now that he had lost his psychokinesis, he was only wearing a small robe. Would he freeze to death if he fell into the snow? She almost didn't dare to think about it. She had no other choice but to use the soul response technique more and more frequently. This kind of technique consumed a lot of physical strength. Even though Ning Xuema's cultivation was profound, she still felt dizzy and her vision blurred. In the process of searching, Hong Ti reunited with her. Seeing her pale face, Hong Ti was very worried. "Master, maybe the D-Zune did not fall into this world. You don't have to work too hard." Ning Xuema shook her head slightly. Shinjiuli and she had a wonderful telepathy between them. Her sixth sense told her that Shinjiuli also crossed into this world, but no matter how she tried to sense, she could not find his whereabouts. She was desperately searching in one direction after another, and suddenly she heard Kirin's unique whistle from the extreme south. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. Kirin found him. She immediately jumped on Hong Ti's back and hurriedly flew in that direction. Hong Ti's flying speed was very fast, and it flew to Kirin's place in less than an hour. Chapter 2465. Ning Xuema looked down and her heart skipped a beat. The little Qilin stood on a hillside and looked down from above. Below the hillside, there was a dense group of people. There were no less than 400 to 500 people, and they were all dressed as imperial bodyguards. Among them, there were those who had attacked the little Qilin. Ning Xuema frowned slightly. What are they doing? Are they going to catch Kirin? However, it didn't seem like it. Kirin looked very free and didn't seem to be restrained. The sound of Hong Ti's wings flapping also alarmed those people. Countless eyes looked up, and the moment they saw Ning Xuema's figure, their eyes lit up. One of them stepped forward and cupped his hands in greeting. Are you Miss Ning Xuema? How did they know her name? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat and she nodded. Yes, you. Those people were overjoyed. They looked at each other and suddenly knelt down together. Greetings, Fairy Ning. We have finally found you. Ning Xuema, even Hong Ti was stunned and didn't understand what was going on. Ning Xuema's heart was beating fast. She stared at the face of the leader. How do you know me? Who sent you to find me? The leader said respectfully, we are here to find you under the order of the state preceptor. Please come with us to the city to meet the state preceptor. The state preceptor misses you very much. What is the name of the state preceptor? Our state preceptor is the state preceptor of Jiuli. The leader said the state preceptor's name. Ning Xuema, Hong Ti blurted out, so the ancestor has been honored as the state preceptor. We have been looking for him for a long time. The little Qilin also rushed over and reported to Ning Xuema, Master, just now, I smelled the ancestor's aura in this place. Just as I was about to follow that aura, I encountered these people. They know your name, so they shouldn't be imposters, right? Of course, she was not an imposter. She had just arrived in this world. Other than the two in front of her, only Shinjuli knew her name. She didn't expect him to be able to dupe the imperial tutor of GU country in half a day, even after losing his inner force and returning to his youth. Sure enough, he wasn't an ordinary person. Ning Xuema heaved a sigh of relief, but she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Purple Moon City, GU country. The monarch of GU country was a wise monarch. ZU city was bustling with activity. There were many shops in the city. Although it was late at night, the streets were still bustling with people. Ning Xuema rode the little Qilin into the city under the escort of numerous imperial bodyguards. Naturally, it caused a sensation. The common people splashed clean water on the streets and covered the ground with red carpets. They knelt on both sides of the street to welcome her arrival. Ning Xuema was no stranger to this kind of scene, but to receive such treatment in this place made her feel like she was dreaming. Half a day. In just half a day, Shinjuli, who had lost his inner force and looked like a child, had subdued the common people in this city. How did he do it? In front of her, a group of people were escorting a sedan chair. This group of people were all delicate and pretty youths around the age of 12 or 13. They were all dressed in the same uniform and looked smart and capable with a kind of otherworldly feeling. The sedan chair in the middle looked very familiar. Ning Xuema looked at the sedan chair and her heart was in turmoil. The sedan chair that the ancestor used when he was touring the Tian-Ci continent. At this time, seeing this sedan chair again, Ning Xuema's eyes couldn't help but heat up. Fairy, the imperial tutor has personally come to welcome you. The guards at the side reported to Ning Xuema. Then, they dismounted from their horses and knelt down in front of the sedan chair. Chapter 2466. There were many people on the street, but it was also very quiet. It was almost the same as Shinjuli's parade on the Tianxi continent. If it was said that Ning Xuema had some suspicions about this state teacher before, now that she saw the palanquin, that bit of suspicion vanished like smoke into thin air. It's him. No matter how he did it, the person in this sedan chair should be the Almighty without a doubt. Could it be that the Almighty had accidentally returned to his original body in the space-time whirlpool and recovered all his skills? She was full of doubts, but only the person in the sedan chair could answer her doubts. Ning Xuema walked towards the sedan chair. The wide sedan chair door was opened by a young man who was escorting the sedan chair. The sedan chair was very deep, and even if the door was opened, she could not see the person inside. But Ning Xuema could feel that there was a gaze on her, and she was very familiar with this gaze. It was really the Almighty. Ning Xuema no longer had any doubts. She directly boarded the sedan chair and stepped into it. As soon as she entered, her wrist was held by a small hand. That small hand pulled her, and Ning Xuema sat on a soft brocade stool in the sedan chair. The sedan chair door closed, and a luminous pearl slowly lit up in the sedan chair. The Almighty sat on the brocade stool, and one of his small hands had already touched her pulse. A pair of deep blue eyes quickly checked her body, and his voice was as cold as usual. Is there anything wrong with you? Those few words expressed his concern, and Ning Xuema's heart warmed. Seeing him again, her heart was finally at ease. She shook her head. I'm fine, I'm fine. Shinjuli did not let go of her hand. You've exhausted a lot of your strength. How many times did you use the soul responding technique? The Almighty's eyes were indeed like torches. Ning Xuema raised her hand and pulled him into her embrace. She rested her chin on his shoulder. It's not that many times. Almighty, why didn't you tell me that you've lost all your skills? As she spoke, she checked his pulse. It was probably the first time Shinjuli was hugged by her like this, and his body stiffened. He wanted to struggle, but Ning Xuema hugged him tightly. Almighty, let me hug you for a while. She had been worried for too long, and until now, she was still a little anxious. Only by hugging him could she feel his reality, and only then could she feel at ease. Shinjuli, he stopped struggling, and took out a pill, and put it near her lips. Come, be good, eat this. Ning Xuema knew that he gave her a pill, and she swallowed it, and accidentally sucked one of his fingers. Just as she was about to use the tip of her tongue to push his finger away, his finger pressed down on the tip of her tongue. Then, he moved closer to her and said with a faint smile, You want it? Ning Xuema, Almighty, you look like a child. Is it really appropriate for you to say such teasing words? She bit his finger, and then kissed his cheek. Almighty, pay attention to your image. She kissed him like she was kissing a child. Shinjuli tilted his head, and Ning Xuema's lips on his cheek moved to his lips. Thus, Ning Xuema and the child Almighty kissed once. After a while, the two of them separated slightly. Shinjuli looked at her slightly blushing face, and smiled. Is the kiss more interesting this time? Almighty, you can be even more shameless. It turned out that after the Almighty became a child, once he let go, it was quite dangerous. The sedan moved very steadily, and Ning Xuema leaned against the window to look at the street for a while. Chapter 2467. Different continents naturally had different sceneries. Looking at the bustling and clean streets and the people's clothes, one would know that this city and even this country were well governed. Ning Xuemo learned from the conversation with Shinjioli that this continent was the only one that Shinjioli had ever been to where psyche power could not be used. Shinjioli had been to this continent twice 500 years ago. Although he did not stay for long, he had subdued the people of this continent. There were still legends about him in this continent. This time he was brought here by the whirlpool. Although he was a boy and had no power, he carried a lot of things with him, including a patrol sedan chair and other items that could prove his identity. When he came here through time travel, he happened to meet a group of patrolling guards. Those guards naturally did not know him, but when they saw him jump out of the snow, they were shocked and scared. They even wanted to kill him. However, the Almighty was indeed the Almighty. He was the first to state his identity. Of course, he did not say that he was once the Overlord, but said that he was the Overlord's boy. Even if he was the Overlord's boy, he was still very honorable. Naturally, these people did not believe Shinjioli's words. Although Shinjioli had lost all his skills, he still had his fortune-telling skills. With just a few words, he told the leader of the group about his past experience. His words shocked the leader. That person did not dare to make a decision, so he escorted him into the city and reported it to the monarch. The monarch was overjoyed. Although he was also dubious, he still personally welcomed him into the palace. After a conversation, the monarch finally believed Shinjioli's identity as the Overlord's boy. The Overlord's boy was also something that could only be encountered by chance. The monarch immediately asked Shinjioli to be the nation preceptor of Jiue country. Shinjioli wanted to use this identity to find the whereabouts of Ning Xuemo and others, so he naturally agreed. The Overlord's real name was probably only known by Ning Xuemo. Others did not know, not to mention the people in this world. Therefore, Shinjioli asked them to call him the national preceptor of Jiuli so that once they found Ning Xuemo, she could trust him and enter the city with him. The great god's explanation was extremely concise, but Ning Xuemo knew that when the great god had transmigrated to this world, he must have experienced some dangers before gaining their trust. He must have relied on his own experience and skills to obtain everything he had now. Fortunately, both of them were fine and had reunited. As long as the two of them were together, nothing else mattered. Great God, you came here 500 years ago. Could you use your telekinesis at that time? Ever since Little Apple, Hong Ti, and I came to this world, our psychokinesis has completely disappeared. Only with psychokinesis could they enter outer space to search for the gate of time and space, and only then could they return to the Tian-Ci continent. Shinjioli shook his head. Back then, I was also accidentally swept here by the whirlpool and lost all my psychokinesis. It's probably the same this time. How did you leave back then? It was still the whirlpool that took me away. Shinjioli answered. Can you summon the whirlpool? Ning Xuemo was full of hope. Shinjioli shook his head. The whirlpool appeared very suddenly. It came and went very suddenly. Ning Xuemo was speechless. It turned out that the whirlpool of time and space required great luck. Then, when would they be able to return to the second mission? If the whirlpool never appeared again, would she and the great god be stuck here and never be able to go back? Although she was with the Almighty and could settle down anywhere, little Nianmo was different. Chapter 2468. If they could not go back, would they not be able to see little Nianmo again? If they could not complete the task given by the Great Master, they would have to maintain the appearance of a child for a long time. Shinjioli could roughly guess what she was thinking. He put his hand on her shoulder and said, Xuemo, since we are already here, let's take it easy. There will be a way when we get there. He always felt that this time's travel was not as simple as it seemed. Perhaps it was a special arrangement. Ning Xuemo looked at him. They had been husband and wife for so long that they had a telepathic connection. She suddenly had an idea. Great Master, do you think that the second task will be on this continent? Shinjioli leaned his head on her shoulder and closed his eyes lazily. Maybe. Ning Xuema looked outside again. Great Master, when you came here 500 years ago, was this the layout of this place? Shinjioli shook his head. No. Originally, there were 3 countries on this continent. Now, 1 country is unified. His pair of clear eyes flashed with a touch of interest. It seems that Jiyue Kingdom used to be the strongest. Who was the king of Jiyue Kingdom? Ning Xuema began to gossip. Shinjioli knocked on the window with his fingers and shook his head. This unified Jiyue Kingdom is a bit interesting. The original king of Jiyue Kingdom was surnamed Ji. It was the second most powerful country on this continent. Huiyue Kingdom was the most powerful country, and Huiyue Kingdom was the most powerful country. Huiyue Kingdom was ruled by the Jun family. Although this unified country is called Jiyue Kingdom, the king is the direct descendant of the Jun family of Huiyue Kingdom, Jun Liuye. Ning Xuema widened her eyes. What do you mean? Did Jun Liuye become the son-in-law of Jiyue Kingdom and then became the king? Shinjioli lay down in her arms. It's not that complicated. Jun Liuye used to be the crown prince of the Huiyue Kingdom. 3 years ago, he destroyed the Jiyue Kingdom and the Skymoon Kingdom. He then united the Yunming continent and established the new Jiyue Kingdom. Ning Xuema was speechless. Was Jun Liuye crazy? Since he had destroyed the other 2 nations, shouldn't it still be the Huiyue nation? Even if it represented a new dynasty, it should have a new name. Why did it change the name of the country to the one that he had destroyed? Inexplicably, she thought of the purple-robed man she had seen in the ice cave in the glacier. That man should be the monarch, Jun Liuye. That man was not ordinary at all. Logically speaking, he should not have done such a brainless thing. What was the point of him doing that? His subjects must have strongly opposed it at the beginning, but he was able to stand his ground against the objections of the masses to reach this step today. His ability to control people was not ordinary. Was there another reason for this? Ning Xuema thought of the woman in the ice coffin again, and a hint of curiosity rose in her eyes. Could all of this be related to that woman? The palanquin stopped in front of a majestic palace gate. Ning Xuema looked outside and her pupils shrank. In front of the palace gate stood the civil and military officials as well as the monarch of Jiyue Kingdom. Leading the way was a purple-robed man. He was tall, elegant, and incomparably handsome. It was the man she had seen in the ice cave. There was no need to ask. This man was the current monarch of Jiyue Kingdom, Jun Liuye. Ning Xuema carefully sized up the monarch. His eyes were slightly lowered. That pair of eyes that should be flowing with light were as quiet as an ancient well. Ning Xuema propped her chin up as she looked at him. It was as if she was looking at a beautiful red spider lily that had bloomed into plum blossoms. This was a rather contradictory person. The palace lanterns swayed and the banquet was luxurious. Chapter 2469. This was a banquet to welcome the arrival of the imperial tutor, so it was naturally extremely grand. Hundreds of tables were set up and all the civil and military officials of Jiyue country were present. Even the family members of the civil and military officials were all present. There were no empty seats in the main hall and it was exceptionally lively. Ning Xuema, Shinjioli, and that monarch Jun Liuye were all seated at the head of the table. The civil and military officials were seated according to their ranks. There were many orioles and swallows in the main hall and it was very lively. Ning Xuema glanced at Jun Liuye's side and a meaningful look flashed across her eyes. At this time, the emperor's empress and concubines should all be present, but they weren't. Jun Luoyi was sitting there alone without a single concubine by his side. Ning Xuema twirled her wine cup. This monarch looked to be around 23 or 24 years old. It couldn't be that he still didn't have a concubine, right? She swept a glance at the people below. There were several men who looked like they had just turned 20 who already had concubines by their side. It didn't seem like this country was engaging in late marriage or late childbirth. Wine was naturally the best wine. The dishes were naturally the best dishes. Ning Xuema tasted the delicacies as she chatted with Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli's expression was indifferent, but he wasn't idle. From time to time, he would peel walnuts and pine nuts for her and place them in front of her. Ning Xuema unintentionally glanced down and saw several curious gazes looking at her and Shinjiuli. Ning Xuema smiled and suddenly felt very comfortable. Originally, when she was with the great god, she would often receive the jealous and envious gazes of those women. Now, she only received a few strands of curiosity. Although the great god now was also devastatingly beautiful, he still had the appearance of a child. The great god didn't shy away from saying that Ning Xuema was his wife, so it naturally attracted the curiosity of those women and not covetous gazes. The covetous gazes of all the women were secretly glancing at Jun Luoyi from time to time. It was very obvious that the single and handsome monarch was the idol that they wanted to entrust their lives to. These women were of all shapes and sizes, and there were all kinds of beauties. Everyone was trying their best to show off their best side in front of the king. Not only did they dress up meticulously, they were also looking for opportunities to show off their talents. In the name of making fun of the banquet, they would take the opportunity to present a song, dance, or play a song. There was even a talented woman who composed a poem on the spot, winning a round of cheers. These women could be said to have brought out their special skills. Even a blind person could see that they wanted to please the monarch. Jun Luoyi had been sitting there the whole time. He drank cup after cup ferociously, but his expression did not change at all. His gaze was on the wine cup most of the time. Occasionally, he would glance at the women performing, but it was as if he did not see them. His eyes were extremely deep, like a deep pool of water. Even the lights in the hall couldn't reflect his eyes. It was as if in this mortal world, no one or anything could shake his heart. He was a monarch, but he was only a machine that ruled the country. He did not have his own emotions and emotions. The civil and military officials in the hall looked to be toasting each other, harmonious and beautiful, but their gazes and minds were all on their monarch. Every time a woman finished her performance, they would secretly observe Jun Luoyi's expression with hope, but in the end, they would only be disappointed. It was very obvious that these officials also wanted these women's performances to arouse Jun Luoyi's interest and let him take these women into his harem. Even if he didn't take in so many women, it would be good to take in one. Chapter 2470. As the women returned one by one, the officials' expressions became more and more serious. When the last woman in the hall finished her performance and failed to attract Jun Luoyi's interest, one of the officials stood up and bowed, saying that he had a new dancer and had arranged a new song and dance specifically to welcome the arrival of the imperial tutor. These performers all used this as an excuse, so Jun Luoyi naturally could not refuse. Shinjiuli was also strange. Others frequently used his name to do things, but he did not show any signs of displeasure. He just sat there lazily and watched the show. After a series of rapid drumbeats, a female dancer stepped into the arena. Ning Xuema's expression suddenly changed. The dancer was not wearing a normal dancer's costume, but a light pink muslin dress. Her eyebrows were like distant mountains, and her eyes were like autumn waves. Her appearance was extremely beautiful. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that this woman's face was very similar to someone. She was very similar to the woman in the ice coffin. June Liuye unintentionally glanced at the woman, and the hand holding the wine cup slightly paused. The woman's etiquette was very thorough. She bowed deeply to June Liuye, Shin Jiuli, and Ning Xuemo, and said a few words of congratulations that could not be wrong. Her voice was crisp and had the softness of a Jiangnan woman. It was very pleasant to hear. June Liuye's lips curved slightly. It was unknown whether it was mockery or ridicule. He drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. The music started again. June Liuye had just picked up another cup of wine when he heard the music. His fingers paused again, and his emotionless eyes looked at the musicians on both sides of the hall. The musicians' hands trembled under his gaze, and they almost played a wrong note. June Liuye was very shrewd and hid his emotions very well. No one could tell whether his gaze was praise or disdain. No one could even tell whether he was happy or angry. After a prelude, the young woman danced to the music. Ning Xuemo was an expert in this field. After watching for a while, she praised in her heart. This song was very good and could arouse people's emotions. The girl's dance was also very good. Every movement was done very well. It was very professional and pleasing to the eye. She glanced at June Liuye. June Liuye was drinking with his head propped up in his hand, his handsome face unreadable. A peeled tangerine suddenly appeared in front of Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo followed the tangerine and saw the ancestor's snow-white sleeve. It wasn't strange for the guru to peel oranges for her, but was it necessary for him to raise it in front of her? Almost rubbing her nose and covering her eyes. Ning Xuemo preferred tangerines and took it. She had just peeled off a piece when the Almighty opened his mouth and looked at her with narrowed eyes. It was obvious that he was waiting for her to feed him. Ning Xuemo had no choice but to put the orange slice into his mouth. She was so busy that she naturally forgot to look at June Liuye. By the time she finished feeding the guru, the dancers had just finished their song. Clap, clap, clap. June Liuye, who didn't react to any singing or dancing, suddenly clapped 3 times. The officials' eyes lit up, and they naturally clapped and cheered. Several officials immediately struck while the iron was hot and praised the girl. Virtuous and virtuous, beautiful and unparalleled. Countless words piled on the girl, praising her to the heavens and earth. In the end, they even said that the girl had the characteristics of a mother. There was only one meaning to all of this. This girl could be taken into the harem as a concubine and help the June family spread its bloodline. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.